The majestic building housed the court. That day, a young girl was awaiting her sentence. She really hoped for justice. Her name was Linnea Zenoff. In the courthouse, there was a statue of Themis which held the symbolic scales of justice. But this time they were wrong. Lady was found guilty of the murder of Clovis Zenoff. All the jurors gave their opinion, and it was against the girl. The court assessed the murder of one's own husband as a serious crime, and this decision was made unanimously. Therefore, the blonde was sentenced to death. After this, a knock was heard from the blow of the gavel, which the judge was holding in his hands. The decision has already been made. This is the end. The girl was unable to believe that her life was coming to an end. After all, she had just begun to live and was very young. Those present in the hall supported this decision. After the verdict was announced, there was the sound of loud applause. People rejoiced and hoped that this lady would die soon. But she herself did not agree with this at all. Linnea tried with all her might to prove that she was not guilty of anything, and that she was set up. She believed that she did not deserve such punishment. But no one listened to the girl. The guards entered the hall and were about to take her away. Miss screamed with all her might and asked the respected court to listen to her again, as she hoped that something else could be changed. The lady screamed that it was really not her fault, and she was ready to swear on anything. After all, she was sure that she did not kill her beloved husband. The guards held her hands. But Miss Spruce managed to escape, and then Linnea ran up to the judges to tell them something. Clovis died on the eve of the meeting. He had chocolate that his wife brought him. That day, the girl went into her husband's room and gave him a gift prepared in advance. It was expensive chocolate. The gift looked very appetizing and cute. The large box contained a lot of sweets, and the girl asked her husband to try one of them. She really hoped that he would like the treat. At that time, the lady was unaware of the consequences of this. The guy happily came up and took one candy from his wife's hands. He only tried chocolate as a child, and that was only once. After all, it seemed too sweet to him. However, Clovis was willing to eat this candy only because his wife insisted on it. It was hard for him to refuse her. While finishing the candy, he also licked the fingers with which the lady held it. The guy really liked this delicacy. After this, the lady hugged her beloved husband. She was pleased to please him with something. She hoped that he appreciated the gift. However, after some time, Clovis lost consciousness. He fell to the floor in front of the other castle servants, and the girl immediately leaned towards him, trying to somehow help. It was clear that there was poison in the chocolate. The lady begged the guy to wake up and open his eyes, but he didn't do this. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Linnea began to cry, not believing her eyes. She couldn't believe what happened and considered it some kind of mistake. After all, they truly loved each other. Therefore, such a loss was very difficult for the girl. Having tender feelings for him, Miss did not want him to die at all. In the courtroom, Linnea cried and said that it was imperative to find the real criminal and punish him. Otherwise, it will be unfair to her late husband. But they didn't listen to her. The judge asked the lady to be quiet, and all because the person sentenced to death did not have the right to acquittal. The girl stood in the hall, continuing to cry. She did not want to come to terms with the fact that she herself would soon die, and this will happen due to a misunderstanding. After the verdict, she was taken to an underground prison. The lady did not remember that day in the best way, and the weather outside was very unpleasant. Linnea was taken behind bars, and the prison cell door was closed behind her. The cold floor of this room welcomed a new guest, sentenced to death. A lady in a green dress walked through the corridors of the prison. This whole situation looked very pathetic in her eyes. She approached the girl and reminded her that she had already spoken thousands of times about how important this marriage was for their family. The woman thought that the late Duke had special feelings for his wife. In addition, she vowed to love him all her life, and now she carried his child under her heart. According to the guest, Miss committed a terrible crime, something that cannot be forgiven for. After that, the woman turned around and began to leave, but Linnea asked her mother to wait. After all, before she left, I wanted to ask her one question, and this question bothered her most of all. The lady wanted to know why her mother gave those candies. After all, it was she who sent the gift that contained chocolate, but there was no answer. The woman just stopped, looked to the side for a moment, and continued on her way. Linnea looked after her, not understanding why they did this to her. She didn't do anything bad to anyone, but it so happened that it was she who was found guilty of this monstrous death of her husband. The girl recalled how, before her death, her husband asked her to fulfill his request. and at that moment Miss agreed to do absolutely everything. The guy whispered that he really wanted them to be given one more try. The lady still blamed herself for offering this chocolate to her husband. After all, it was because of him that he died. The lady spent the whole night in such thoughts while in her prison cell. The next morning, the guards had to bring her in to carry out the sentence. But when they entered the girl's cell, she was no longer there. The knight was very surprised to see this. After all, no one opened the prison door and there were no more visitors. That morning was very sunny. One of the maids was preparing the room by opening the curtains. The birds were singing pleasantly outside the window. Sunlight through the windows filled the room with warmth. The maid whispered the phrase that this day had finally come. The assistant was happy about the holiday that had arrived. The maid entered Princess Lenia's room and called her. This voice was very familiar to the girl. The assistant apologized for being noisy since the morning. But she also reminded that today is the lady's 18th birthday. Lenya opened her eyes, not understanding what was happening. After all, she was not supposed to be here now, but in a prison cell. The lady could not understand what the maid was talking about. Her 18th birthday was a long time ago, but she congratulated the princess with a smile, and she said that she had finally become an adult. It was a big holiday for the entire royal family. Lenya Yalsdabi was the only princess of the kingdom of Pontiano, and the treasure of the royal family, a beautiful flower of high society. There were rumors among the aristocrats that on the day of her 18th birthday, she suddenly went crazy. When she woke up in the morning, she immediately started screaming, and at night she took and cut all the roses in the garden. Aristocrats quickly picked up this topic of discussion, but someone thought that these were just rumors. The princess was very beautiful, and it is likely that the gossip was spread by envious people. Some were of this opinion. Others preferred to believe the rumors. But even if these are empty rumors, the girl showed off her beauty too much in high society. And this might not please everyone. This is how the ladies explained the appearance of gossip. In addition, they said that even the most beautiful people were not always the happiest. But it was most likely out of envy. The Duke of Clovis's servant suggested that he find someone else to marry. This woman tried to warn the guy against strange actions. After all, they could not allow a crazy princess to become a duchess. But the guy did not believe that such changes in the lady's behavior could suddenly happen. After this, the woman began to expect an answer to the previously asked question, but it didn't come. Therefore, the lady was forced to admit that, despite her behavior, the girl remained just as beautiful. She also said that people never stopped praising her beauty. After all, everyone in high society talked only about the lady's appearance, and many people are already tired of such news. However, in any case, it would be better to abandon Princess Lenya. The woman advising this asked the Duke to think about himself. This news, of course, came as a surprise to him. The guy was sitting at his desk in his office and trying to find some solution to this situation. But no thoughts really came into his head. Clovis tried to think about it all, putting his hands under his chin and weighing the pros and cons. Lenya was in her castle that day. Many people asked her to finally come to her senses. After all, the engagement was soon to take place, and the Duke was looking forward to this. The woman persuaded the girl not to cancel anything, and the servant standing nearby agreed. The priests have already expressed their opinion regarding the lady's behavior. They said that this madness was not at all like that of Princess Lashon of Vivior. They begged Lenya to come to her senses and come to her senses. After all, with such behavior, she upset her mother and other relatives. But the girl knew exactly why she was doing this now. Her goal was to cancel her marriage to Clovis by any means necessary. And Madame was not ready to retreat. She considered her interlocutor a vile woman. In addition, she showed up in the palace without permission. And she has been boring her for days now. The lady decided that she would no longer allow herself to be manipulated and would change her past. The queen asked what she wanted, and she offered jewelry, dresses, or a ball. But Miss remembered her rude manner of expression and her spoiled past well, and the most important thing that she decided was to never marry Clovis. The lady's gaze was full of determination, and in her eyes there was contempt for her mother. Duke Clovis Zenov was the favorite and youngest son of Emperor Rodin. He was also the ruler of the lands of Rudivia. He was the one who was called the Sword of the Empire, and the chief of the knightly order of Diort. The guy had excellent fighting abilities. He was also, surprisingly, a brave man. The woman said that he held a very honorable position, so much so that even the Princess of Pontiano herself would want to become his wife. He was also called a murderer. those whose hands are stained with blood. Others said that he was a demon who did not feel human pain. Many obscene stories were told about him. But all this was just rumors, Lenya's interlocutor assured. And at the same time I tried to hold her hand in a friendly manner. The mother asked the girl if she was afraid of these rumors. But rumors were spread about many people, and even about herself. But Miss didn't think it was just rumors. She remembered how evil this woman could be. She also remembered what the queen had done before. Suddenly Lenya stood up. This gesture was so confident that her interlocutor was scared. The servants ran up to the woman and asked if she was okay. The lady ordered her assistants to immediately take her mother to the palace. After all, she didn't want to see her anymore today, and she asked one of the maids to comb her hair. It was too difficult for her to do anything without a mirror. The assistants bowed obediently to the girl. They were ready to fulfill any of her instructions just to stay in the palace. Everything necessary for the hairstyle was prepared. The comb and various hair oils were already on the shelf. The maid approached Lenya and began to comb her white silky hair. She did this very carefully, showing concern for the girl. The lady asked the maid Helen why she stayed. After all, even Pepin has gone somewhere. And the assistant replied that she could not serve adequately, so she was sent to the kitchen as punishment. But the girl did not give any orders regarding punishments. However, the interlocutor recalled that 3 days ago the miss was injured. This happened when the mirror broke. After all, the maid should have been punished for the wound on Lenya's precious body. The lady looked at her hand and saw scratches on her wrist. There were no more questions. The girl called Helen a rather capable assistant. Therefore, she believed that she should be in the main palace and serve the queen. In addition, the girl's mother relied heavily on her. The maid began to say that the queen had sent her to look after the princess, and it was an honor for her. The lady asked if her interlocutor also thought that she was crazy, but she denied everything, and she said it was impossible. In addition, the priests themselves said that the miss was completely healthy. She just had a lot of anxious thoughts, but in fact, the assistant didn't think so. However, I tried not to express my thoughts out loud. Lenya immediately recognized the lie, and she said that she hates lies. Therefore, Helen has only 2 attempts left to tell the truth. The girl, in a commanding tone, told the maid to tell her what she had heard from her mother. But the maid only repeated that she did not understand anything. Miss took the scissors and said that Helen had one last chance. The assistant was very frightened by this behavior of the princess. Her eyes opened wide and were full of fear. She asked the lady to put away the scissors, and she tried to understand what she was going to do. The girl replied that if they answered her normally, nothing would happen, and she asked why Pepin was kicked out without her permission. The assistant continued to say that she had already said everything. This happened because the maid was unable to serve with dignity. The lady was not satisfied with this answer. She walked up to her and swung at her. Helen's eyes begged for mercy, but I couldn't say anything out loud because of fear. But a little later, loud screams were still heard in the palace. Almost everyone who was in the estate heard them. The princess's mother approached the maid and asked who was shouting like that in her palace. The assistant could not explain everything clearly the first time. However, she still said that this concerned the maid, whom she sent to the Pink Palace. The assistant's name is Helen. The queen immediately understood who they were talking about. But I really didn't want the truth about this to become known. So Madame ran to her daughter. She tried to figure out if the maid had told her anything. And until she came to her daughter's room, she spoke in a low voice, calling her a shameless girl. This behavior of the girl alarmed those around her. It was simply incredible. She never behaved like this before. Lenya always remained an obedient and well-mannered girl. The maid named Helen was still in her mistress's room. Trembling with fear, she did not know what to expect next. The blonde swung the scissors at her and continued to hold them in her hands. The situation was extremely tense. Lenya said that if she caught her eye again, the maid's beautiful face would no longer save her. And if she understood everything, she should have immediately called Pepin here. The girl ordered the maid to get out of sight and let her go. And the assistant immediately ran away in tears. After all, I was afraid to tell the hostess anything. While the maid ran away, the lady stood and looked after her. And a little later, Pepin finally came to her. This girl was released from the kitchen. Lenya was very glad to see her old friend again at home. She didn't want anyone else to be so close to her. Miss ordered all of Helen's things to be taken outside the palace. After all, now Pepin has a new role. She should become the girl's maid. Her friend didn't mind this. A little later, guests came to Lenya's room. Aromatic tea was prepared for them and the table was beautifully decorated. The room had already been put in order and all the flowers had been watered. Sunlight from the window illuminated the room, filling it with warmth and comfort. The girl and her mother were sitting at the table and talking. At first, the guest could not find words to describe her experiences. It was unpleasant for her to communicate with such an impudent girl. Those around her said that Lenya had gone crazy, but each time the lady answered more and more harshly. The woman tried to figure out how she could cope with this. At that moment, not a single word had been spoken. And Miss noticed this. She asked why her mother was silent. Besides, the tea was probably already cold. The guest decided to ask the first question, and she asked if it was true that she kicked Helen out. Lenya confirmed this. The girl herself also wanted to discuss this with her mistress. Madam tried to find out the reason for this action, and the lady was ready to explain everything. The girl said that she behaved very impudently, and she spoke as if she were the mistress of a pink palace. In addition, she kicked out the maids and behaved the way she wanted. And she also lied to her mistress and the mistress of the palace, answering the questions posed. Moreover, Pepin had been serving the girl since childhood, and sending her to work in the kitchen without the owner's permission was an extreme insult. The lady said that she trusted Helen and made her headmaid because she worked for the queen. But the assistant crossed all boundaries and began to behave arrogantly. That's why she was expelled. The girl asked if her mother was angry with the maid's behavior. After all, not only Lenya was deceived but also her mother. Because of this, the miss asked that the maid be punished properly. The queen agreed with her daughter's arguments, but said that kicking out workers was too reckless an act. After all, Miss herself knew well how difficult it is to find reliable people. It was a very difficult task. Helen, although not for long, still worked for their family. Therefore, it was decided that it was better to keep her with her and watch her. Lenya agreed with her mother's words, and she was ready to return the guilty servant back. In the end, they decided to do the following. Helen must go to Pippin's place, even though it meant she would be working in the kitchen, and Pepin will become the princess's maid. And this is even despite the fact that that assistant was the daughter of aristocrats. That is why I had to think about and reconsider my behavior. Pepin was given the task of bringing Helen and sending her to work in the kitchen. The maid agreed to obediently carry out this assignment. Lenya decided that the Pink Palace should only be under her control, and I decided not to act like a stupid girl anymore. After all, then everything will be in order with her life. The main thing is to prevent the mother from interfering and making decisions for herself. The lady firmly decided that no one else would dare to touch or offend her. After some time, the conversation was over, and the girl was left alone in the room. By lunchtime, the weather began to deteriorate. Powerful clouds covered the entire sky. Apparently, it was going to rain. Lenya was in her room with her beloved assistant. The maid was making her a face mask from a ripe orange. The maid could not understand why the lady behaved this way. And I didn't believe in her madness. Miss replied that she would like to leave the capital. Therefore, it is necessary for her mother to quickly drive her out to the summer palace or autumn estate. Then she won't have to get married. And she and Pepin will be able to chat there all day long and live without worries. The assistant noted that her mistress looked very beautiful and proceeded to place the cut orange slices on her face. But Lenya asked not to talk about her beauty, because she wanted to know what others were saying about her. The maid began to say that the girl was considered bad, so much so that I didn't even want to retell it. The rumors were the worst, and the young assistant shouldn't have remembered that either. She understood that this was all untrue and that her mistress was actually a very good and noble person. Meanwhile, it was starting to rain outside. Heavy drops fell from the sky, soaking the ground with moisture on which many plants grew, and in such disgusting weather, someone dared to plan a trip. A carriage drove along the road, emitting the ringing clatter of hooves. The travelers discussed the absence of a diplomat in their delegation. He was needed so that His Serene Highness would meet the Mad Princess in person. But another traveler did not agree with this, and he asked Elton to be more careful in his expressions. After all, only the Duke himself had the right to decide what to do and what not to do. In the carriage was Romanson, accompanying the knight Clovis and Elton's older brother. This discussion almost led to a fight. One of the servants twisted the other's hand. Therefore, the one who turned out to be weaker agreed that it was possible to do without a diplomat when meeting with a crazy princess. He was interested in only one question. This man wanted to know why His Majesty liked that girl very much. At the same time, Pepin wanted to know why Lenya did not like Clovis so much. Miss began to search for words to explain her opinion. But this had to be done carefully because few would believe the truth. The guy answered the assistant that he liked the girl because she was very beautiful. And this beauty kept him awake at night, making him think about the lady. And Lenya at that moment said that she considered the guy very unattractive. So much so that it made her stop thinking about his positive qualities. Elton was very surprised that the Duke liked the crazy princess. After all, you can get used to your appearance, but your character can be hard to come to terms with. The princess's assistant did not know whether to agree with her mistress's opinion or not. She had never seen that person before. And the lady's answer surprised her extremely. On that rainy day, neither the princess's assistant nor the Duke's servant completely agreed with the opinion of their masters. By evening, the rain became heavier and heavier. The heavy drops made the loud sound of rain. No one in the kingdom liked this weather. Powerful rumbles of thunder frightened people, and bright lightning illuminated the entire city. This thunderstorm spoiled my mood and took away my strength. But despite the weather, Lenya still calmly went to bed late in the evening. Her soft bed created a feeling of comfort that could not be experienced when going outside. The girl recalled how in a past life she met her husband. That time she was brought to his home in a carriage. Then the lady was very curious to know who her future husband would be. After all, the engagement had already been agreed upon, and their first meeting had not yet taken place at that time. The Duke of Clovis immediately met the miss and greeted her. From the first meeting they liked each other. The girl was attracted by the guy's tall stature and his beautiful eyes. The brunette voiced that Lenya had come a long way to come to him. And I was very glad to finally meet her in person. Previously, this was precisely the moment when Miss first thought that she might be able to love him. So now everything had to go differently. One after another, lightning flashed on the street, producing powerful peals of thunder. And the rain still didn't stop falling. But something still kept the girl from falling asleep that evening. Thoughts came one after another, driving away the long-awaited sleep. Lenya decided that she no longer wanted to get involved in what happened before. Therefore, everything had to be changed. The girl went to the window and began to watch the thunderstorm. Suddenly, she saw someone in the garden. This thought haunted her. I had to call my assistant and tell her that there was someone outside the window. How loudly Miss called for her assistant could be heard on the street. And there stood the Duke. Hearing the scream, he concluded that the girl was scared. The guy hoped that the lady would still meet him and be happy. But that did not happen. The brunette stood in the rain, feeling unprecedented loneliness. Drops of rain seemed to wash his distressed soul. The feeling of cold penetrated not only under my clothes, but also deeper, right into my heart. Chaotic thoughts flashed through my head, intertwining with each other, making it impossible to concentrate on any of them. The rain mixed with tears which the Duke did not even notice. He felt loneliness as acutely as never before, as if the whole world had turned its back on him. That evening, Lenya was informed that the royal guard was guarding the palace. However, there were no signs of an invasion anywhere. The butler asked if the girl really saw someone in the garden. After all, even after a thorough examination, they found nothing. The lady was surprised by this question. She couldn't comprehend what the man meant, and she tried to understand whether his words meant that she was imagining a person. But he tried to find out something else. At least that's what the butler told them. The real motive for his question remained unknown. Clovis, meanwhile, was already at home on the estate and thinking about yesterday. What bothered him was that the girl was scared when she saw him. Although this was not surprising, because he appeared so unexpectedly in the garden. The servant was surprised that the guy didn't say anything to the lady then. But he believed that the princess's reaction was completely understandable and normal. The same goes for her appearance. Lenya, being on her estate, reflected that in a past life Clovis was absent from the city at that time, and the current events were abnormal. This bothered her. The butler told the miss that the king wanted to see her quickly, but the girl was immersed in her thoughts and had no time for that at all. The maid stood up for the mistress, telling the man that he apparently did not care about the princess. But the guardsman repeated that he simply meant that he had not seen anything that day, and it was still raining outside. It seemed endless, as if he had decided to stay in this city forever. The water no longer collected in small streams. Huge puddles spread along the roads. Her Majesty the King was waiting for his daughter in his hall. Sitting on the throne, he said that because of Lenya, there was an uproar throughout the kingdom. After all, at first she imagined all sorts of things in the garden. Then she kicked the maid out, and on top of that, she behaved inappropriately. In addition, Helen Detrin was a maid sent by her mother to look after her during her illness, and the girl had to understand how her parents cared for her. The father said that it doesn't matter whether his daughter wants it or not, but he will still marry her to Duke Clovis Zenoff. He didn't care whether she was crazy or not. After all, the man was ready to do anything to send Lenya to the Empire. It was very unpleasant for the lady to see such an attitude towards herself from her parents. Deep resentment began to appear in her soul. Kneeling down, Miss told her father that he had just spoken about parental care, and now he threatened to marry her off by any means. The man explained that as soon as Lenya marries the Duke of Clovis, everything will change. After all, the kingdom will be able to gain strength, and he did not understand why his daughter did not take such an important factor into account. But the behavior of her parents seemed to the girl even crazier than her own. They did all this because of power. These words angered the king, and he asked the princess to watch her words. But he himself did not want to do this, considering his behavior to be quite correct in the given circumstances. Miss said she became mad because something strange happened to her. However, now she understood everything. Lenya explained that she developed this disease because of her parents. The princess was determined never to repeat the mistakes of the past. So I told my father that he could do whatever he wanted, but she will never marry. The man's harsh reaction to this frightened Pepin, but not Lenya. After this conversation, the girl began to quickly leave the hall. The man asked where she was going, but the princess did not answer. When Miss left, her assistant followed her down the corridor. She asked if the lady was okay, and the lady agreed. She also asked not to worry about her. After all, something completely different was important now. The girl remembered well what happened in her past life, and wanted to prevent some difficulties and disasters. She went to the window and began to watch the rain. The sound of the elements became the background for everything else. The noise of the city died down, drowned out by the endless falling of water. In a conversation with the maid, the girl noticed the strength of the rain, but she did not understand why all this was said. Miss explained that there might be a flood, and she asked to check the dam on the Ponte River. The assistant did not understand why she was doing this and what could have caused the flood. She looked at her mistress with surprised eyes, but she was still ready to carry out this instruction. The following events took place in the Cristiano Empire. The weather there was a little better, but it was hard to call it good, and the incident there unfolded much more sadly. Alexis Rodin II, Emperor Cristiano, had been seriously ill for a long time. Sometimes he would tear down the curtains and sometimes start screaming loudly. Near the man stood the high priest and his son. The guy asked His Majesty to hold on and get well soon, and he asked the priests what condition his father was in now. However, they could not please them with anything, since the emperor's condition did not improve for a long time, and it was even critical. But if His Majesty loses consciousness again, then nothing can be guaranteed. Hearing this, the guy screamed. These words were tragic for him. He understood that his father's health was catastrophic. Therefore, he began to shout at the priest, saying that he must certainly cure him, since he held such an important position. The guy's name was Donald Rodin III. He was the son of Alexis Rodin and the only prince of the Cristiano Empire. However, the priest said that it would be very difficult to do this. After all, the emperor suffered from madness for a long time. Therefore, it was important to heal his soul first. These words angered Donald because they left him with no hope. The guy was very worried about his father but could not help him. After this, His Majesty asked to call his younger brother Clovis. The son held Rodin's hand, rejoicing at every intelligible word, but these words did not give him a pleasant feeling. After all, he understood that even when he was dying, his father was only thinking about the Duke of Clovis. The following events took place in the embassy of the Cristiano Empire. In the kingdom of Pontiano, the Duke himself came to the ambassador of the empire. O'Malley Croson was the imperial ambassador to the kingdom of Pontiano. When Zenoff came in, he immediately greeted the guy. Clovis noted that the embassy building looked very luxurious. And it was true. After all, the embassy is the face of the empire. The man remembered a recent conversation with the queen regarding this guest. She asked me to tell you that all the rumors about Princess Lenya were lies, and there were no problems with the engagement. Moreover, the princess was very close to the first prince, and the duke could count not only on friendly relations, but also on loyalty. However, the ambassador said that he was not particularly good at lying. Therefore, when Clovis came to him, He began to think about how to convey this news to the guy. After all, everyone around already knew that Lenya had gone crazy. The man began to select suitable words in order to convey the queen's request in a more tactful manner. Lost in thought, he closed his eyes for a moment. The guy was the first to start a conversation, and he asked to arrange a meeting with the princess as quickly as possible. This request greatly surprised the ambassador. This was the last thing he expected from the duke, but it happened. The brunette asked for the meeting to take place today, or at least tomorrow. But still, it shouldn't have been delayed for long. O'Malley said he would definitely convey his words to the royal family, and he was glad that this time he didn't even have to lie. Later, news of Duke Clovis's desire to meet Lenya reached the royal palace. The girl's mother promised that if she did not come to the meeting, she would cause trouble for her daughter. For example, this would mean that her dear maids are being poorly served. After all, Lenya herself appointed Pepin as her senior maid, and those who did not do their job properly were punished. The assistant could have been beaten with rods. Hearing the threat to the maid, the lady swung the glass she was holding and broke it. All its contents spilled onto the bright red carpet. The girl was very angry with her mother for such blatant blackmail, and the maid was frightened by her strange behavior. However, she asked the lady not to think about her. After all, these are just rods. According to the assistant, there was nothing worse than marrying an unloved person. Therefore, she believed that it was better for her to receive the punishment herself, and I hoped that it would all end for sure. But Miss did not agree with this at all. She told Pepin that she was her person, therefore no one should treat her haphazardly. And after that, she told her assistant to bring a dress. The blonde already had a plan ready, and the upcoming event would be no more than a marriage of convenience. The girl wanted to organize a concert, showing everyone that it was better not to mess with her. In clear sunny weather, guests gathered on the spacious terrace. They enjoyed the warm rays of the sun and the light breeze. The surrounding gardens were in full sunrise and added to the charm of the overall atmosphere. Laughter and cheerful conversations intertwined to create the backdrop for the event. The guests whispered, trying to predict the princess's next act. Their looks and gestures spoke louder than words. And then the lady came out. Her appearance immediately attracted everyone's attention. Usually the girl was graceful and reserved, but today she looked completely different. Rumors and guesses began to fly among the guests. Some suggested that the reason for her behavior was a recent madness. Others believed it was related to government business matters. Despite the interesting outfit and well-chosen accessories, the girl's face did not express warm feelings. The look showed cunning and deceit. Some exchanged short remarks, trying not to attract too much attention to themselves. But still, almost everyone discussed the princess's condition, and they said that she was completely mad, and this could be noticed just by looking at her gaze. It was as if someone had possessed her. And few people approved of the choice of clothing and accessories. However, the guests were afraid to say it loudly for fear of being heard. They also tried not to come close to her. People were afraid that the girl might do something weird again. The lady went down a large and long staircase, shrouded in a red carpet. The girl came out to the people, well remembering her plan. Those present clearly understood that she was dissatisfied with something, but no one knew exactly the reasons for this behavior. Everyone tried to find out what caused Lenya's unusual reaction. And then the Duke's assistant approached her. He said it was a great honor for him to meet the princess. Miss looked at the Duke's servant with disbelief, and he said that he was a messenger from Clovis. His name was Elton. He conveyed that the Duke had requested an audience with the princess. The interlocutors stood in the middle of the park. That one was a real oasis in the heart of the city. There were green lawns and well-groomed alleys all around. They were decorated with flowers and created an atmosphere of peace and tranquility. Along the paths there were elegant metal tables lined with chairs. People sat at them and enjoyed desserts, talked and laughed. The atmosphere was filled with serenity. Miss asked where the Duke was now. After all, I was already ready to meet him. But do it in such a way that the guy doesn't want to see her anymore. In the center of the park there was a fountain with several tiers. Water fell from it in cascades, and she created gentle music for everyone who was there. However, the lady was in no mood to enjoy it. The Duke and his second assistant were sitting at one of the tables in the park. His gaze was directed towards the fountain. He couldn't wait for the princess. In the same park, Pepin stood behind a tree. The assistant was very worried about her mistress. but she was very surprised by what she saw. This was the first time the girl saw the Duke. He was a tall, handsome guy. His black hair glistened in the sun, and the look was thoughtful and confident. The fair skin at times resembled snow. The maid couldn't believe her eyes. Standing behind a tree, she kept looking and looking at the guy. What she saw was not at all consistent with what she had previously heard about this man. After all, her owner said that he was a very ugly person. That's why the lady didn't want to marry him. Lenya walked over to the table where Clovis was sitting. The assistant turned to him and said that he had brought a girl, and she looked at him with an angry gaze, expressing dissatisfaction with this meeting. The Duke's servant introduced her as Princess Lenya. Miss lowered her eyes and frowned. She tried her best not to please the guy. But after a moment, her expression changed. The blonde opened her eyes wide and smiled happily. Then she ran to the brunette, and at the same time she said how handsome the prince was. The lady tried to behave in such a way that her behavior would push the Duke away from the future wedding. Miss said that she had been thinking for a very long time about what her wedding with her future groom would be like. Her behavior seemed strange to everyone present in this park. The servants whispered among themselves, saying that they warned the guy not to mess with her. And the girl continued to describe their wedding. She said that she imagined a sparkling red carpet. He must have looked simply amazing against their background. And then she began to look around everything in order to discover something strange again. And so she fixed her gaze on one person. This man was carrying a tray with glasses filled with red wine. The lady shouted that she had found what she was looking for, and later she ran up to this man, scaring him very much. This lord was also surprised by the princess's actions, and the guests, sensing something was wrong, began to look at each other nervously. Suddenly, with incredible strength and grace, the princess grabbed a tray with crystal glasses containing wine and threw them up. At first, everything froze in a delightful but frightening silence. Lenya's eyes sparkled with some kind of wild fire. The glasses flew into the air, sparkling in the light of the sunny day. Drops of wine, like precious rubies, began to slowly fall, splashing. They create a bizarre pattern in the air. For a moment, it was as if time had stopped. The guests watched as the glasses reached their top, and then they began to inexorably fall back to the ground. Time seemed to stretch, and every moment seemed like an eternity. Clovis stood there in shock, not knowing what to do or how to react. The princess returned to her place. She had a satisfied smile, as if she had just completed some mysterious ritual. Drops of wine were the first to reach the earth. They fell to the ground, leaving dark spots, and they were like little bloody footprints. The wine also fell on the floor, causing the lady to flinch a little. A moment later, the drops of wine were followed by glasses. There was a loud crash and the glasses shattered into many pieces. They fell, sparkling in the light of the sun's rays, and they created a crunchy sound. A tense silence reigned. Everything around was frozen in surprise. Some opened their mouths, others raised their eyebrows, others clenched their hands into fists. The whisper mixed with the dull echo from the glass. It was a moment where the lady's grace contrasted with the unexpected aggression of her action. And this duality was amazing for everyone present, especially for the queen. After the glass broke on the floor with a melodious clink, the lady froze for a moment. She enjoyed the moment and the attention of everyone present. The guests froze, watching her every move. And after Lenya asked the Duke if he liked such a carpet, Miss slowly and gracefully lifted the bottom of her dress, and carefully taking off one shoe and then the other, she showed off her slender legs. Her bare feet carefully touched the floor, and she invited the guy to walk along this sparkling path together. At the same time, the princess did not show the slightest sign of discomfort. Her every gesture was filled with elegance and confidence. It was as if she was performing a carefully rehearsed dance. Her actions were unusually careful and thoughtful. The lady looked at the Duke with a smile and said that it would be beautiful. The eyes of everyone present were focused on her. Their surprise was mixed with awareness of the madness of this whole situation. The park became quiet, and it seemed that no one dared to disturb her. Surprise gripped both the queen and the girl's maid. The two of them stood there, unable to say a word in defeat. But the guy couldn't stand it. To prevent the blonde from stepping on the glass without shoes, he did it himself, but with shoes on. The brunette blocked her path so that she would not harm herself. And he carefully picked up Lenya in his arms, as if she were the most fragile treasure. The lady was outraged by this, as the situation took an unexpected turn for her. The Duke held her confidently but carefully. His hands were strong, but his touch remained gentle. There was a mixture of madness and tenderness in the air. The guy said that if the girl really wants to walk on glass, he will buy her glass shoes. Everyone present in the park eventually left. This magnificent garden remained completely deserted, but hundreds of blooming roses continued to visit it. The brunette continued to carry the girl. So over time, Lenya asked how long Clovis was going to do this, and how long he wanted to continue walking like this. But he replied that he just decided to stay nearby. The Duke continued to carry the lady carefully, and step by step he moved away from the scene of the incident. Every step he took was confident and smooth, despite the unexpectedness of the situation. Their figures were moving away from that park. They left behind a trail of shards of glass and dizzying emotions, and the guy continued to carry the girl in his arms, and he carried her as if she were as light as a butterfly. The lady herself was upset. After all, I didn't expect that her behavior would help them become closer together. Over and over again, she asked how long he would continue to walk and carry her. But the brunette replied that they didn't have long yet. Clovis wanted to find a quiet place without people, but Lenya still insisted that he let her go. Miss began to practically break away from his hands and said that it was enough, and the Duke surrendered. He carefully placed her on the ground. Now I could finally take a break from this journey. Looking at the ground, the girl asked what it was. But Clovis was interested in why Miss was pretending to be mad. The lady replied that she was not pretending, but that she really was. A calm story about his madness seemed illogical to the guy. Miss thought that he had come to town just for her sake, and I thought that the brunette wanted to check whether she was crazy or not. But the Duke denied it. He just wanted to know why the lady didn't like him, and he tried to understand why the girl pretended to be crazy. Perhaps it was because she was trying to avoid marrying him. But Lenya said he was wrong, and she wanted to prove that she was not pretending to be crazy, but that she had really gone crazy. Of course, it was hard to believe because she looked normal. However, later she could insert a flower into her hair, or break a mirror, or she could start walking barefoot on the glass and talking all sorts of nonsense. The lady looked down and said that if the Duke had nothing more to say, then she would go. And at this time she tried not to meet his gaze. The guy was surprised why she was going to walk barefoot. After all, Lenya left her shoes near the park and the servants took them away. But the girl didn't seem to mind. She calmly walked a few steps, showing that it did not cause her any discomfort. And a little later she came across a pebble and screamed. Miss realized that she wouldn't go far like that. Therefore, it was necessary to come up with something. At that moment, the guy caught her so that she wouldn't fall. This caring gesture even pleased the blonde a little, causing a barely noticeable smile on her face. She remembered how she had treated this man before, and she remembered all the feelings she had in her past life. Although I really didn't want to relive them again, the guy asked the lady to put on her shoes, and since there was no other, he offered her his shoes. The girl put them on. Although it was not very comfortable for her, it was hard for Miss to take even a step in those huge black shoes. So the lady reached the estate. Her legs were not damaged from that crazy act, and the bright sunny day was not spoiled. Although every step was difficult, the blonde understood that it would be safer this way. These shoes were too big for her and even fell off a little. Because of this, her steps were slow. When the girl entered the room, she looked out the window at the guy. She was filled with curiosity, and I wanted to know what he would do next. And the Duke stood on the street completely barefoot. He tried to figure out what to do and how to get out of this situation. But most of all, he wanted this girl to become his wife. A difficult path lay ahead of him back to the estate. Arriving, the servants asked him to give up this idea, but he did not agree. After all, he could not be sure that the emperor would agree for him to refuse the wedding. The questions became more and more, and the solutions became more difficult to find. The assistant said that if he refuses, then there will probably be another candidate to take the place of his wife. He also asked how likely it was that the rumors about the lady's madness were exaggerated. This question made the brunette remember the girl's words when she asked if he had seen the princess in person. At this moment, her eyes were very sincere, and it seemed that she really didn't consider herself one. The guy didn't know how to react to them. After all, she really could be crazy. This thought made him sad and offended. He asked Valencia to find out everything again, but in more detail. After all, there was some truth in these rumors. The maid promised to check everything properly, and she asked if he wanted to say anything else. The brunette took this as a hint that he should go out. But the assistant said she didn't mean it, although her look said otherwise, and she added that this is impossible. After all, these were the possessions of the Duke, and she just worked in them. Besides, he was very merciful to her. She just wanted to say that now it was time to finish work. There were a lot of books and papers on the table that needed to be processed. Therefore, Clovis himself could see that she had a lot of work. But Elton should have been called as well. However, the assistant was ready to cope on her own if she got help. And the guy agreed to this. He simply had no choice. He approached the table with a vase containing many different fruits. The guy decided to refresh himself and took a peach from there. He also told Valencia that the princess had a half-brother. His name was Rodrigo. Quite recently, he returned to the capital. As far as Clovis knew, the prince had returned from the battlefield approximately 3 days ago. And this indicated that he arrived on the day of the ball. The assistant confirmed this. And she said that, if you believe the information, this is the pure truth. The guy remembered that he had an appointment with Rodrigo, and perhaps he could tell him something interesting. Valencia said that indeed in 3 days this meeting would take place between them, but 3 days was too long. Therefore the Duke asked to postpone it until tomorrow, or even for tonight. After all, this question was extremely important to him. The weather was very beautiful that day. The warm rays of the sun warmed everything around, creating a wonderful atmosphere. The girl was sitting at a table in the park and trying another dessert. It turned out to be surprisingly tasty. Therefore, the lady wanted to find out from Pepin who prepared it, and she replied that Helen was the cook. This answer upset the princess a little. After all, if this was true, then the queen could easily kill her if she only wanted it, and such a turn of events was not at all in the girl's plans. The lady sat thinking, and the maids standing nearby in black and white dresses immediately realized that something was wrong. Miss just recently sent Helen to the kitchen, and she was already starting to cook. This showed that she was very different from Pepin. The assistant said that she would look into this issue. The girl was very upset that the maid already had access to the products, but still she asked me to leave everything as it was eaten. After all, there was no guarantee that she would not kill her if she went to another place. However, it was worth thinking through everything. During this conversation, the girl's brother came. He greeted her and wished her a good day. But for some reason, the lady herself was not so happy to see him. And when we met, she even looked away from him. This surprised her assistants, who at the time came closer to find out what happened. The blonde looked at his sister and smiled. And I wanted to find out if what they said was true. Her relationship with her half-brother Rodrigo was not very good in her previous life. And she realized this when she grew up, and also when it began to be published. After all, she was a legitimate daughter. And because of the difference in status, they were separated from him. But then Lenya was still too small to feel it. The guy took a deep breath and leaned back on his chair. The maids moved a little to the side, but at such a distance that the conversation could be heard. The blonde said that his mother had been quiet lately. The girl began to explain the reason for the queen's behavior. This was because she wanted to give her in marriage to the Duke. She also noted that her brother most likely had nothing to do lately. After all, he lived in her palace and was not busy at all. But the guy noted that the girl would probably be bored alone in such a large palace. This answer surprised her very much. She understood that the motives were completely different. Rodrigo looked at his sister with a sly look. He tried to understand whether they believed him or not, and he added that it was true. But the girl refused to believe in her. That's why she said that he could think what he wanted. Miss was surprised why her brother began to look at her with such a satisfied smile. And I thought that he was delighted to hear that the lady had gone mad. But then the guy jumped up, mentioning the valet. The girl thought this was strange. She understood that he could not have jumped up from his seat just because of the arrival of this man. Then the blonde mentioned the high priest, but Lenya would not be at all happy about his arrival, and she turned to see who really came to them. The guest greeted the princess, addressing her by the title of Her Highness. It was the high priest Luke. The priest could give a blessing, but higher than this blessing came only from the high priest, and even higher from Dad. The girl had respect and fear for these people. Luke continued to say that this is how they met. The guy entered the conversation by saying that he himself had just arrived at the palace, and he mentioned that, as the high priest already knew, his sister was sick. The man said he was worried about that too. So I wanted to know if everything was okay with the princess. And looking at the girl, he noticed a wound on her hand. He asked to take a closer look at her if the princess would allow it, and Miss didn't mind. When he took her hand, he said that his guesses were correct. The girl had no abnormalities. These words surprised and frightened the blonde a little. After all, she did not want to be considered worthy of marriage after these words. Luca continued by saying that it was not that she had no abnormalities, but the girl was completely healthy, and he explained that the girl was still sick not physically but mentally. The man said that she had a deep illness, the outcome of which was impossible to know. Therefore, he asked her to come to the temple and find his teacher. After all, there was a possibility that he could heal the soul of the princess. The conversation was over. The girl went to her chambers, and she stayed there until the evening. A large and bright moon was visible from the windows of her room. The lady was surprised by what she heard during the day, especially because the high priest himself said that she had a disease of the soul. It turned out that not only scammers could say this. This could be heard from people like Dad. All these thoughts did not give the girl peace. After all, as far as she remembered, he was a very cunning man. Due to his politically important role, many people suffered. He acted only in his own interests. Besides, the blonde remembered that the man was quite dangerous, even though at first glance it seemed beautiful. It was also said that the high priest was very popular, although he was recently appointed as a priest in the capital temple of their kingdom. But now she had more important things to do. The lady was worried that Clovis was still in Pontiano, and if her memory did not deceive her, the empire would not worry about his absence. And so it will be until the current emperor Rodon II becomes ill. However, the guy could not return to the empire when the emperor was in very bad health. After all, there used to be rumors that Clovis made a lot of efforts to seize the throne. It was the 31st day of summer. The lady sat on the bed and tried to remember what events happened at this time last time, and how to make sure that the Duke does not come back. It was a sunny and bright morning. The warm rays of the sun warmed the entire palace. The flowers that decorated the park near the house also woke up. Meanwhile, the guy tried to understand what the princess was going to do. Unexpectedly, he learned that Her Highness had asked for an official meeting with him. This news surprised him extraordinarily. After all, the brunette didn't even count on this. Therefore, I tried to understand why they sent him such an invitation. Valencia did not know about this either, and the other servant would like to say something, but he was not allowed to. The woman asked what the Duke's answer would be. After thinking a little, the guy asked with a smile if they would stop him. The assistants agreed to this. If Elton agreed right away, then Clovis would be interested to know Romanson's answer. But they told him that whatever he decides, it will be right. Thus it turned out that it was 2 against 2. This decision cannot be made by majority votes. A little later, Elton finally decided to say that the brunette should never agree to this meeting. After all, it is unknown what might happen during it. But the Duke believed that nothing terrible had happened to him last time. Therefore, perhaps the next meeting will be safe. The assistant asked the guy to return to the empire, that is, to his possessions. Clovis announced that Elton would go with him, and the rest could rest for now. But the servant was against it. At this time, Lenya and her brother were talking in a gazebo in the park. Sitting at the table, he asked what the girl was up to. After all, her behavior was very strange, and she replied that my brother was late today. She also asked if he would go to train. After that, taking a cup of tea in her hand, she took the first sips of the drink. But Rodrigo again asked what his sister was up to. After all, he was told that she officially invited Duke Zenoff to an audience. The lady explained that she had not planned anything. He was just a candidate for her groom. Therefore, it will be better to meet him at least a couple of times. But the prince understood that this was not all. Before, she didn't even want to see him. But now something has changed. He stood near the table and looked intently at his sister. And Miss was afraid to even look him in the eye. The girl began to make excuses, saying that she had never said such a thing before. She, of course, at first felt uneasy about the strange rumors that portrayed the Duke as a psychotic and a murderer. However, a little later I realized that he turned out to be a pretty nice guy. Therefore, he can be considered as a future groom. But for this, it was worth looking at it again, and then decide. Still, it was worth getting to know him better. In addition, the queen really liked him, and she even burst into tears when she learned about the audience. And all because I haven't seen my daughter normal for a long time. During this explanation, the brother noticed something was wrong. Therefore, I asked if the queen had completely stopped worrying about this. She didn't have the slightest bit of embarrassment or worry. But the lady did not see any problem in such behavior. She didn't think that it could bother her in any way. After all, last time the Duke carried Lenya away in his arms, and now Miss wanted to arrange a banquet to meet him. The woman was very happy about the future event. It was like a holiday for her. The lady invited her brother to come too. He said that he understood everything. However, in reality he realized that he would no longer learn anything from his sister. He had to find out everything about this himself. Unexpectedly, the girl added that the event would be very fun. While saying this, she didn't even hide her smile. Rodrigo addressed her by name, sensing something wrong in her words. But she explained that she was going to have a reception on the lake, and what boating plans to do. This should be very interesting. Therefore, I once again invited my brother to come. The lake where the event was planned was hidden in the high mountains. It is surrounded by dense forests and rocky cliffs. The water in it is crystal clear and transparent, so much so that you can see the bottom strewn with colorful stones and small plants. On the surface, the water was calm, like a huge mirror. It reflected the majestic mountain peaks and endless sky. Over time, those whom the lady invited began to gather there. When the morning sun began to rise, its rays fell on the lake, and they gave it a warm amber hue. Then many noted that the weather was good. The guests gathered at the shore of the reservoir. They enjoyed magnificent views of the surrounding mountains and the mirror-like surface of the water. The atmosphere was half joyful and half tense. The air was filled with the aroma of pine trees and freshness. The Duke stood among the guests and waited for Lenya. On the one hand, he was happy about this meeting. On the other hand, I tried to understand why the lady agreed to this. His assistant stood next to him. The guy was lost in thought, thinking about what happened earlier, and waited for the princess to finally come. Guests standing nearby tried to dissuade him from today's swim. They realized that the princess's madness could manifest itself again. Therefore, they suggested that his lordship refrain from sailing. But the Duke did not agree with them. In order not to listen to warnings, he decided to move a little further away from the crowd. His faithful servant followed him. He said that the guy would probably sail in the same boat with the princess, and she might do something crazy again. But these words did not achieve their goal. After all, after this, the guy self-confidently said that he would look and decide for himself how to act. A little later, a blonde approached the crowd of guests. She was dressed in an elegant pink dress and slowly walked to meet the guests. They were even a little tired of waiting for her. But despite everything, they were glad to see her. The girl stood on the shore of the lake in a dress that gently wrapped around her slender figure. The lady's blonde hair was styled in a vintage style and glistened in the sun, giving her an angelic look. And the big blue eyes were full of curiosity. Miss exuded sophistication and grace. Her slight smile added warmth and friendliness to the image. Her brother stood behind her and watched this whole picture. The girl asked if everyone had already gathered here. There were many people standing around who showed extraordinary respect to her. These were the queen's maids and servants, as well as the Duke's assistants. But the guy himself was simply silent. He looked at the lady with affection, but tried to be careful. After all, the assistants were right. This blonde could really be up to something again. For now, everything was going according to the princess's plan. The Duke was unable to leave for the Empire and stayed here because of the banquet. Today she wanted to act like crazy in order to ultimately avoid marriage with Clovis. However, he received a lot more attention than she expected. Therefore, the girl began to worry that her trick might not work. These thoughts began to give me anxiety. Lenya's eyes began to look around, trying to assess the situation. A little later, the lady said that it was a very hot day, and she stepped aside a few steps so as not to reveal her current disappointment. However, the brunette noticed her excitement. This brought a small smile to his face. The guy tried not to lose sight of the blonde. A lady in a luxurious pink dress and crimson shoes cautiously approached the gathered crowd. Her movements were graceful and confident, despite her inner excitement. Miss kept her back straight, her head high and her arms slightly raised. When she approached the invitees, they turned around and parted, giving way. There was a feeling of curiosity in the air. It seemed strange that everyone to whom invitations had been sent came, which could mean she could handle it easily. Gathering the most frivolous gossips of high society was not so easy. But still, the invitation, which she wrote with her own hand, helped a lot. Besides, Lenya sprayed them with perfume. At the very beginning, Miss thanked the guests for coming, and she expressed the hope that they would enjoy the banquet, as well as the boating. This was supposed to be a fun time. After these words, the Miss approached Lady Evelyn and Lady Anne. She said she hadn't seen them for a long time. These girls were also smartly dressed and were expecting a great celebration. They told the princess that she had become even better lately. Lenya was amazed, not expecting that they really thought so. But still the blonde thanked them for the compliment. And she added that she didn't do anything special today. These guests asked Her Highness to listen to them. And one of the invitees took a few steps towards the princess. This girl's name was Evelyn. Lenya asked what happened to her. The miss explained that she thought the lady was upset about the rumors. However, it was a great relief for her to see the lady cheerful. But that day the girl's mood was really good. Therefore, she asked not to pay attention to past rumors. And she even pretended that she didn't understand what she was talking about. The guest began to try to explain what she meant. However, the second girl interrupted this conversation by saying that rumors are just rumors, and you shouldn't pay attention to them. This began to anger the princess, and raising her voice she asked what Evelyn meant. After all, it seems she has a great reason to start going crazy. But this conversation was not destined to continue. It was at this moment that the Duke approached the interlocutors and called the princess. He greeted the girl and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. At this moment the guy smiled, unaware of what was prepared for him. The timing of his arrival was the most inopportune time for Lenya all day. After all, she wanted to find out something very important for herself. But she simply said that she tried very hard for today's holiday, and she thanked the Duke for coming. She also wished everyone a pleasant time. The guy was unusual to hear this from a girl. Evelyn and Anna saw this as a suitable opportunity to distance themselves from their conversation with Lenya. Therefore, they began to move away from her with quick steps. The lady looked in their direction and tried to catch up with them. But the brunette called out to the girl and asked her to come to him. He didn't know what the ladies were talking about before. Lenya looked at the guests with a very menacing look and asked Evelyn to return. However, she did not listen to her, and she and her friend continued to leave, telling the princess that they were leaving. It was very bad timing. The lady began calling them even louder and asking them to come to her. However, her words no longer evoked any reaction. She was about to run up to the ladies, but the guy grabbed her hand and prevented her from doing so. And looking into the beauty's eyes, he asked to talk to her, but only in private. It was hard for the girl to refuse, because Miss remembered what kind of person he used to be. She was also tormented by curiosity as to what rumors Evelyn had heard, and she was almost there to find out. But this never happened. The lady decided that nothing could be done. Since Plan A failed, there was also a Plan B and a Plan C. They could also be used to achieve their goal. The Duke continued to hold the girl's hand, but she asked to let her go. And the guests watched this whole situation. Not wanting to seem rude, the brunette let go of the blonde's gentle hand. He also apologized for his action, admitting it was rude. And after that he extended his hand to her, palm up, as if he was offering to reciprocate. The guy again asked the girl for forgiveness, and she extended her hand to him. And smoothly, with a feeling of respect, he brought her hand to his lips. At this moment, time seemed to stand still. A light breeze ran across the surface of the lake, adding even more romance to the moment. The gentleman carefully touched her hand with his lips, barely noticeable. His lips were warm and tender, and this kiss was full of respect and admiration. The lady, feeling his touch, bowed her head slightly. The eyes glowed with a soft light. She understood that this gesture was a sincere expression of feelings. However, the girl preferred not to have this happen. The guy said that he hoped the miss invited only him. But that was not the case. The laziness seemed strange, because she had never seen her husband like this before. So the question in her mind was whether this was really the Clovis she knew. And she explained that she simply invited him as a guest to the banquet. This shouldn't be given too much importance. Miss was also surprised that the guy did not address her with enough respect. After that, he corrected himself, calling her a princess. However, there was no sign of remorse in these words. The brunette again asked Her Highness to forgive him. The lady asked what he wanted to talk about, and he replied that he wanted to talk about them. The girl clarified what exactly interested him. The Duke replied that these were different things, for example, how the lady looked at showing them intimacy. But Lenya did not see the need for this, even though the guy explained that they would soon get married. However, she asked him not to make such long-term plans for the future. After all, the Duke probably still hasn't found the answer to the question he asked during their last meeting. Then he asked why Lenya was not attractive, although this time the blonde was determined to make him understand this, and she asked him if he liked boating. Lake Robu was beautiful this time of year. The girl's proposal seemed quite good to the guy, and she offered to show him the lake. The Duke couldn't wait for this. However, everything that was supposed to happen in the future was considered completely his fault. The brunette and the princess walked along the shore of the lake, deep in conversation. The pond spread out in front of them. Its crystal clear water reflected the blue sky and surrounding mountains. The surface of the water was calm, like a huge mirror, and it reflected all the beauty of the surrounding world. Majestic mountains rose on the far shore. The forest growing at the foot of the mountains consisted of slender pines and spruces. Their greenery was so rich that they seemed to breathe life and freshness. The water of the lake played with all shades of blue and green, depending on the angle of incidence of the light. Sometimes circles appeared on the surface from light breezes, and these waves created a dance of glare. It was strange for the lady why the guy looked completely different at that moment. She couldn't understand what was wrong. The Duke's appearance indicated that he had fallen in love, although the guy had not been cold to her before. Miss remembered the day when she saw him in her garden. He looked at her with such a face that he didn't look like himself. However, it seemed that his affectionate attitude towards her was only because of status. Everything else was fake, and now it was as if a completely different person stood in front of her. But then the lady thought that maybe the brunette was just falling in love quickly. The question remained why he had changed so much. A little later they reached the pier. At the shore of that beautiful lake, not far from the pier, stood a wooden boat. She swayed slightly on the water. The boat was made of strong oak. Its sides and bottom are polished by time and countless swims. The wood, dark with age, had deep shades of brown, and it contrasted beautifully with the transparent blue. The boat was decorated with elaborately carved patterns reminiscent of waves and leaves, giving it added charm and elegance. Small waves approaching the shore gently rocked her, and they created a soothing sound of splashing water. The ship seemed to be part of this beautiful landscape, blending harmoniously into the natural beauty of the lake, and they gave it additional charm. However, the boat turned out to be much larger than the guy expected. The girl asked if he wanted to see a small boat like a gondola. After all, this body of water was quite wide, and small ships were more suitable for narrow river canals. The Duke was surprised at how well Miss knew about gondolas. After all, in her home country little is known about them. It became fashionable among lovers only after she left for the Empire. The lady tried to explain her knowledge, but nothing came to mind. That's why the blonde said that she heard her brother Rodrigo about them. But it turned out that this prince was standing next to them and heard the whole conversation. Therefore, I could safely say that this is not true. It was a very inopportune moment for my brother to come. The lady said they were talking about gondolas, and she added that he said that supposedly such boats had become popular in the Empire. And later she corrected herself, saying that they would soon be popular. And she asked again if that's what he said. Rodrigo was surprised by this whole conversation, because he did not remember saying such a thing. However, the girl insisted that she remembered his words, and she added that her brother told her what was happening in the world. After all, she was constantly in the kingdom. Suddenly someone's footsteps were heard. A blond man approached the interlocutors, and he called the princess. It was the high priest Luke. Lenya said that it seems they started seeing him too often. After all, she didn't expect to meet him here at all. The Duke confirmed the unexpectedness of the guest's arrival, and he hoped that his appearance was welcome. Rodrigo said that he came to his father. It was he who asked him to visit them for a while. This brother's behavior surprised the lady a little. She was worried that her plans could be disrupted. The Duke greeted the guest, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time, and the high priest reciprocated his feelings. A little later, the brunette took the girl by the hand and took her a little to the side. He told everyone present that they had their own things to do, but the guest called out to the princess. She turned and looked at him with a dissatisfied look. At this moment, there seemed to be too many unexpected people in this place, but Luke warned her that she shouldn't let the pain of loneliness into her heart. After all, it was an emotional break in the soul. A person fell into this state to avoid pain and protect himself. Therefore, the high priest asked not to let this feeling control the girl. He also conveyed words of consolation to the blonde, and he said that he understood what was going on in her heart. The sun's rays penetrated the thick foliage of the trees and touched the surface of the lake. They created a dazzling shine. The water was crystal clear and its smooth surface reflected the light. It looked as if millions of tiny mirrors were scattered throughout the pond. Rays of light played on the water and created shimmering patterns. They rolled smoothly over the waves. Entering the boat, the lady squinted a little from the bright sun. The girl and the guy sat under the canopy waiting for the departure, but Miss was no longer thinking about the journey. After all, I was trying to comprehend the words I had recently heard. Luke asked her not to let loneliness take over her. Therefore, it was worth understanding who Miss was trying to protect now, since she felt so bad. The first thing that came to mind was thoughts about protecting my future husband. After all, the girl definitely wouldn't want him to die because of her. The guy was sitting next to her, also thinking about something. Lenya hoped that if Clovis left because of her madness, she could avoid death. And he will probably be happy too. Suddenly, she heard someone calling her. In the midst of this calm, the guy proposed marriage. His words hung in the air, instantly changing the atmosphere. The lady's heart sank and her eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, she even forgot to breathe, and 1,000 thoughts flashed through her head. She didn't expect such a question now. Her face, previously calm and peaceful, reflected a mixture of shock and confusion, and her gaze darted between the Duke and the lake, as if Miss was looking for confirmation that this was really happening. The gentleman noticed her confusion. His smile slowly disappeared. Concern flashed in his eyes. The lady felt her fingers tremble slightly in his hand and tried to smile, but her smile came out tense and uncertain. The Duke promised to make Lenya happy, and she tried to regain calm. The blonde took a deep breath and looked at Clovis, still unable to find words. After all, she remembered well how their marriage ended the last time, and I tried my best to prevent it from happening again. The girl believed that she was not given a second chance in vain. Everything around them remained just as beautiful. Sun glare on the water, a soft breeze and a light breeze bringing the scent of pine trees. But for the lady, this moment changed everything. Her thoughts were full of contradictions. She appreciated Duke Zenoff, his care and attention. But she tried her best to avoid marriage. After a long pause, the lady asked again if the guy had proposed marriage. He replied that it was so. The lady was embarrassed by the fact that they had only met for the second time. The guy said that this is already a lot for a marriage of convenience. There are people who get married without seeing each other at all before the wedding. In this situation, they were very lucky. But the lady said that she did not want to marry the Duke. After all, I dreamed of true love. The guy promised to provide this love to the blonde. But the confidence in Clovis's words only irritated the girl. She added that she didn't particularly like the guy, although I tried not to name the reason. Clovis asked what he should do to get her to agree to marriage, but the lady explained that no matter what he did, he still wouldn't succeed. And I decided to clarify what else he wanted to say. The Duke took the girl by the hand and said that she was more suitable for him than the others. At that moment, he looked at her intently and continued to hold her hand. Such assertiveness scared her a little. Lenya's eyes were full of surprise and fear. The lady looked very confused at this moment. But the guy insisted that they needed to get married and continued to persistently look at her. After this, the gentleman, sensing her doubts and confusion, began to squeeze her hand, stronger but just as gently. His fingers curled around her palm, his touch both warm and insistent. At this moment, he could not hide his emotions. His gaze was full of concern and hope, and the lady tried to escape. A little later, she succeeded, and she repeated that she had already made her opinion clear on this issue. And when the girl pulled her hand away, the ship shook. The lady added that she didn't want to talk about it anymore. But uttering these words, she could not stay on the boat and fell into the water. The girl instantly disappeared under the dark, cold surface of the lake. Her body, wrapped in a pink dress, sank into the depths with a slight splash. Water immediately surrounded her. This made the guy's heart skip a beat, and Lenya sank deeper and deeper. The sunlight, so bright just a moment ago, became increasingly dimmer, and gradually turned into an ominous darkness. Silence reigned around the blonde, broken only by the murmur of water and the beating of her frightened heart. The air was getting less and less. Scraps of memories, faces of loved ones, happy moments of life flashed before her eyes. She felt her strength leaving her. The guy, pierced with horror, instantly rushed after her. His legs swung silently in the air as he flew down where Miss was falling. The water greeted him with sharp cold. But the brunette's thoughts were only about the girl. She was all that worried him in the world. His heart beat in his chest like a bird in a cage, and thoughts rushed by at terrifying speed. The Duke cut through the cold darkness of the water column, and then he saw her, fragile, silent, with her eyes closed. At that moment he wanted to ask her what she would like to tell him, but there was nothing to say. Although the lady's eyes were slightly open, she was not aware of what was happening around her, and she didn't know what she should have done in relation to the Duke. A little later, the princess was already on the shore of that same lake. The lady was lying on the sand heated by the sun. The seconds dragged on for an eternity, and so, as if in response to the guy's request, Miss opened her eyes. They reflected the sky, a summer day, and her savior. The brother, the high priest, and the ladies were also around. Those present were glad that she came to her senses. People remembered conversations about the girl going crazy. Therefore, thoughts arose that she wanted to commit suicide. Her faithful maid approached the lady, but she asked Pepin not to worry as she was already fine. The assistant was very frightened during all these events and did not want to leave her mistress. The lady sat on the sand and began to feel the cold creeping up on her, and it penetrated to the very bones. The summer heat that reigned just recently seemed to have evaporated, giving way to coolness. Wet clothes hampered movement, and the trembling that engulfed the whole body was uncontrollable. Miss seemed defenseless at that moment. Seeing this, the Duke, without hesitation for a second, offered to help her, and he extended his hand to her, offering to become her support. And later he picked her up like a fragile vessel, and gently hugging her to himself, he carried her. His strong arms held the lady tightly, and his breath warmed her. At that moment, Lenya felt saved. There was the sound of footsteps along the sandy path. You could also hear the singing of birds and the rustling of leaves on the trees. These sounds merged into a single melody, creating an atmosphere of safety. Rodrigo offered to carry his sister himself, but the Duke refused, saying that it was his duty. With confident steps, he continued to walk forward. However, a little later I heard his name called. This messenger reported that the Emperor fell ill. The guy couldn't believe his ears. He wanted to see the Duke immediately. It turned out that the man's illness took over. The Duke understood the danger of the current situation, and he said that he would immediately return to the Empire. However, the girl realized that he would have to be stopped. Otherwise, there may be bad consequences. The guy's face, recently illuminated with a smile, was darkened by a shadow of sadness. His eyes, usually bright and cheerful, were filled with deep sorrow. The lady understood that it was necessary to do something urgently. The Duke looked at the beauty. At that moment, a whole range of feelings could be read in his eyes. But most of all, concern was visible in his gaze. He was afraid for both his beloved and the Emperor. However, the miss plucked up courage and turned to the guy, saying that he should not return to the Empire now. This phrase puzzled the guy. He could not understand the reason for this behavior. After some time, the Duke of Clovis was supposed to take the Sentier road, and now I was still getting ready to set off. The lady understood that he would have to leave anyway. However, she really didn't want this. Her gaze was full of sadness. The blonde recalled how the guy asked why he shouldn't have returned there, but she couldn't explain anything to him. But she just got angry because of her powerlessness. Lenya reproached herself for saying such a stupid thing. It seemed as if she had truly gone mad. Miss was sitting on her bed in her room, overcome with sadness. And later she realized that since she pretended to be crazy, she could do all sorts of stupid things. And it would look quite natural. Her faithful maid Pepin came into Lenya's room. She looked at the girl in surprise, not understanding her behavior. An idea came to the princess's head. Miss told the maid to send a man to Sentier Road, and she wanted them to tell the Duke that she urgently wanted to see him. This meeting will not take much time, and she began to prepare to leave. The assistant was surprised by this request. The maid did not understand why, out of the blue, the hostess changed her attitude towards this man. However, she said that it was impossible to hesitate for a minute, and she asked Pepin to hurry up. Lenya looked very confident as she said this. The Duke was already in the carriage at that time. The horses rushed forward at full speed, making loud clattering hooves. The carriage drove forward across the field, which was well lit on that sunny day. Suddenly, someone drove up to the guy and stopped the carriage. He also conveyed the princess's orders. The brunette couldn't believe what the racer said. It seemed strange that she wanted to see him again. The girl was about to arrive and asked to give her just a little time. Valencia reminded him that a lot of time had already passed. Therefore, the conversation could be postponed for us later. However, the brunette answered the maid that she said that they were supposedly already late. This means that in any case, their arrival will not be at the appointed time. As he spoke, he looked at her intently. The Duke's assistant supported Valencia, saying that she was right. But the guy was ready to wait, and he asked how long it would take the princess to arrive. The driver said that the princess had left with them and should arrive soon. The maid understood that the brunette had been acting strange lately. However, if he arrives too late in the empire, this may be regarded as disobedience to the imperial decree. And Clovis knew about it. Valencia began to wonder whether he really did not seek to gain the respect of the emperor. A little later, the royal carriage arrived with the princess. The girl, dressed in a blue dress, quickly ran across the green meadow as soon as she got off the carriage. Her blonde hair fluttered in the wind, creating a glowing halo around her face. The dress fluttered gently in time with her movements, giving her an air of lightness and grace. And her eyes, full of joy and excitement, shone with happiness when she approached the guy. The brunette stood a little ahead, waiting for the girl. His heart beat faster with every step she took. His eyes burned with impatience and love. He did not take his eyes off her, feeling how her energy filled everything around him. When the lady finally reached him, they stood still for a moment, looking into each other's eyes. Her breathing was slightly out of breath from running. Her cheeks were pink, and her lips curved into a happy smile. At that moment, the world around them seemed to stop, leaving only the two of them at the center of the universe. The guy carefully raised his hand and gently touched her cheek. His fingers were warm and soothing. Miss closed her eyes for a moment, enjoying the touch, and then opened them again. And she met his deep, love-filled gaze. The Duke slowly leaned towards the girl. Their faces were only a few centimeters from each other. Finally, their lips touched in their first kiss. It was a gentle, timid touch, filled with all the tenderness and awe they felt for each other. The lips merged in a single impulse, conveying the entire depth of feelings. Lenya felt the warmth of his breath and the gentle touch of the guy's lips, and her heart trembled with happiness. All around, nature continued its dance. The breeze gently played with her hair. The sun filled everything around with a soft golden light, and the birds sang their joyful song. For them, this moment was an eternity. The kiss lasted a moment but seemed endless to them. Their faces shone with happiness and love, and the lady's eyes sparkled with joy and gratitude. The guy, still holding the blonde's hand, smiled, realizing that this moment would forever remain in their hearts as the most touching and beautiful moment of their lives. The girl said the guy's name and began to beg him not to leave. After all, whatever the reason, she wanted him to stay with her. Unexpectedly, the guy answered the princess that it seemed to him that he too could no longer live without her. And he looked at Miss with all admiration, realizing that perhaps now they would be together. The day was approaching evening. The Duke and the blonde got into the carriage to discuss everything. They really had a lot of questions for each other. The guy said that the lady saw the reaction of those around her. Therefore, I suggested getting to the point. He didn't think that she suddenly fell in love with him, and that's why she tried so desperately to stop her from going to the empire. The lady added that the brunette was also probably aware of the rumors that were circulating. For example, about her madness. But I still came to see for myself. However, she did not believe that this was the only reason. Therefore, I decided to answer the question, and she said that the guy should use her. After all, most likely, he needed an excuse to get rid of such close attention from the emperor, and also from the young crown prince. Therefore, she believed that he himself knew that if he returned back now, he would begin to threaten him. Moreover, the emperor probably did not have long to live, since he called the Duke. Surely this was done in order to ask Clovis's younger brother to disappear, and so that he could pass the throne to his son. Therefore, she suggested using it as an excuse, although she herself knew very well that the reason for such a desire to marry her was to lull the vigilance of the children of the emperor and prince. That's why the lady didn't want to let him go. The guy asked on what basis such a conclusion was made. After all, they did not officially have any relationship with her. With a sad look, the girl said that it was because she was his lover. However, the Duke objected that marriage would be much more reliable than just the relationship of two lovers. But the blonde said that she did not intend to marry him. After all, she didn't want to become a pawn in the hands of the emperor and Duke, and also all the men of the kingdom. And I just wanted to live a free life. For someone who wanted to live like this, she understood the situation too well, and this raised some suspicions. The lady added that she had been too open in telling all this to the Duke, and she suggested that they just meet and that's all. Such behavior could distract the emperor. After listening to the girl to the end, the guy asked what would happen if he refused her. But such a turn of events was unlikely. The brunette decided to find out what if he could guarantee his beloved freedom, and taking her hand, he asked again if she would marry him then. Such changes struck the lady more and more. Miss looked at her interlocutor with wide-open eyes. After all, she remembered that in her past life she was the only duchess in the empire, and she was the flower of high society. Although Lenya was shorter than the queen, she also occupied a rather dangerous position. But in the past, she didn't know this. That's why she dressed up brighter than the young queen of Rodan III. From about that time, he became hostile to both the duke and her, and it is quite possible that, against the backdrop of her attitude towards the young queen, he felt that he was not taken seriously. However, the girl did not understand what kind of freedom the duchess could have. After all, she also had a personal life. The guy said that he was one of those people who did not strive for a simple relationship. Therefore, he proposed to announce their engagement. Lady would like to avoid any connection with Clovis as much as possible, but only doom could help hold him back. Therefore, the blonde was forced to agree, but on the condition that this agreement will be terminated after 2 years. As she said this, there was sadness in the girl's eyes. She remembered perfectly well what awaited her earlier. The evening gradually turned into night. It was a full moon then. The huge moon illuminated the entire city and the carriage in which Clovis and Lenya were talking. The guy was surprised by how much the girl did not want to marry him, and he wanted to find out what exactly she didn't like about him. A little later, the blonde went home. Lying on the bed in her room, she recalled her conversation with the duke, and I remembered how simply I offered to use it. After all, I was already truly ready for this, but only if the engagement is terminated after 2 years. When she got out of the carriage, her face was so hot that the miss didn't even dare to turn around. Clovis questioned her so persistently that it was difficult to talk to him, and as a result, everything turned out as it did. This time he was really different from his previous self. The maid Pepin sneaked a peek into the room. She was glad that her mistress returned home, but she understood that the girl's mood was not the best. The lady lay on the bed and said nothing. The maid, entering, asked the mistress for forgiveness. After these words, Lenya got out of bed and asked Pippin what had happened. The assistant replied that the Queen and Prince Ludwig were heading here. They are almost there. She understood that these events had to happen, so she asked me to take them inside when they arrived. She also thanked the maid. After some time, these guests arrived at the estate. Her mother came into Lenya's room. She held a candle in her hands, trying to illuminate the room a little. The woman greeted her like a dear daughter. Ludwig Alisdebi, Prince of Pontiano, also came. He also greeted the girl, calling her precious sister. The lady asked Pepin to turn on the light and go out for a while. The assistant happily agreed. However, the blonde herself was not very happy about the upcoming conversation. Outwardly, Ludwig was so similar to her that it was even terrifying. All three sat in the room, waiting for the upcoming conversation. I even liked the similarity with the girl's brother before, and no matter what their relationship was, he was still her older brother. The lady asked how her family got to her. The queen noted that Lenya was in good spirits today, and it was nice. She also said that she heard that something happened between the princess and the duke, and she asked me to tell him how the wedding issue was. It was impossible not to admit that this marriage was primarily done for the sake of the kingdom of Pontiano. However, it was not a bad decision for the girl herself. After these words, loud laughter erupted in the room. The lady understood that this would happen. After all, it seems that just some kind of marriage was very important for the queen. Clovis Xenoph was the brother of Emperor Rodan II and the uncle of Rodan III. He lived his whole life in such a way as not to come across them again, and he wanted everyone to believe in his desire to gain the throne. However, despite all their efforts, they and the young prince inevitably faced a quarrel for the throne. This was their fate. The following events took place in the royal palace. The servant reported to the emperor's son about the reason for the duke's lateness and disobedience to the will of the emperor. And he said that the reason was laziness. They said that she was crazy, and rumors about her even reached the empire. Rodan III realized that the guy really disobeyed the emperor's request because of some madam. This had never happened to him before. Rodan asked for more details about what happened during the trip. After all, the duke had never been interested in women before. He was a man obsessed with fighting. But I went to look at the girl. It seemed that this simply could not happen. After all, until recently there was absolutely no information about brunette women. It was strange how the guy got to this point in such a short time. The duke went to check the rumors about the girl's madness. Besides, she had an excellent appearance, but it was clear that besides her appearance she had something else. Rodin was angry that in this case he would not be able to torment his uncle if he married the one he chose. And turning to Robin, he asked if the servant knew that the picture hanging near the throne was fake. After all, his grandfather, that is, Rodin I, never in his life took his grandson Rodin III in his arms. There was a picture of a grandfather holding Clovis in his arms. His father changed the picture, ordering it to be redrawn for him. It seems their grandfather was very fond of Clovis. Therefore, he had to suffer, in the guy's opinion. He believed that this would be fair and correct. The servant confirmed this. At this time, the conversation between Lenya, her mother and brother continued. The queen asked her daughter why she would marry some aristocrat, or even a member of the royal family. The duke in the empire was the beloved youngest son of Rodin I, and a wedding with him would be the best decision for a girl in the role of a princess of a small kingdom. The lady said the word demon. Her mother looked at her in surprise, but she continued saying the words killer and bloody knight. She also explained that all these nicknames belonged to the Duke of Clovis. Ludwig explained that when he saw this man in person, he did not seem to be as bad as they said about him. The girl asked to say directly that this was not done for her sake. They just wanted to sell her to the empire. After all, they hoped that she would become a duchess and support the kingdom. This was the plan to use it. However, the queen objected to these words. She tried to reassure her daughter that this was not true. Ludwig continued by asking his sister what exactly she wanted to say. For example, would it be better if one of the princes went there as a hostage? After all, the duke was the owner of lands with the power of the empire, as well as the younger brother of the emperor. But Lenya realized that in the end Clovis would die precisely because of his status. The mother put her hand on her daughter's hand and said that it was clear that the duke liked her. And it was wonderful. There was no greater blessing than marrying a man who loved her. Other kingdoms were demanded to take the prince hostage. They are lucky to have a daughter. The woman said that she was very sorry for those prisoners. Ludwig added that if his sister did not agree to go there, then Rodrigo would become a prisoner from their kingdom. And he asked if she wanted him to see the prince treated horribly in the empire. This will be a great loss for the kingdom itself. She also probably knew what influence he had as a knight. After all, as soon as the brother is taken to the empire, he will immediately lose his power. And the simple reason was satisfied that the captive princes could not resist such inappropriate treatment of themselves. This was the death of Rodin I. After all, he had friendly relations with the princes of other states. Initially, such a policy was introduced not for the sake of insult or mockery, but for the sake of suppressing uprisings. The princes of the small kingdoms were new faces in the empire and served as diplomats. They each represented their country and its best sides. However, under Rodin II, they lost all power and strength. He was far from friendly towards them. Having lost their power, the hostages also lost their position in the eyes of the aristocrats. Some began to make acquaintances with dishonest people and destroyed themselves. When the lady became a duchess, they were all like withered flowers that had lost their former glory and honor. However, there was no way she could allow her brother to become a prisoner. The queen turned to her daughter, saying that she could solve all this only if she married the duke. But it was difficult for the girl to continue this conversation, so she said she couldn't listen to it anymore. And then she got up and headed towards the exit of the room. The queen thought that her daughter was actually crazy. Ludwig would like to stop his sister, but the woman asked not to do this. After all, their lives were in Lenya's hands, and they needed the girl in order to gain the power of Duke Zinoff, and also to control Rodrigo. The guy replied that that's why they couldn't defeat their sister. It seemed strange that the girl suddenly became so proud. The prince asked his mother to look at his sister's attitude towards them, but she ordered her to leave her for a while. After all, Miss has already taken a different path anyway, and the more she resists, the faster she will drag Rodrigo into the swamp. And not only him, but also everyone who is dear to Lenya. They could all be in danger. The queen asked her son not to worry. Everyone was on their side, and Ludwig's plans were, even if Lenya left for the empire, to send his brother as a prisoner. The guy hoped that this would become a step to the throne, which he would certainly have to go to, together with Duke Zinoff. In the evening, the girl prepared herself a bath for bathing. The servants strewn her with flower petals, representing the epitome of luxury and relaxation. The pool was made of white marble. It was smooth and cool to the touch. The curved edges gave an elegant and sophisticated look. In the center of the bathroom, under the soft light, the water sparkled and shimmered. She attracted with her purity and transparency. The surface was generously strewn with flower petals of various shades and sizes: delicate pink, bright red. Snow white and purple petals of roses, peonies, and lilies floated on the surface, and they created bizarre patterns, contrasting with the clear blue of the water. The petals swirled slowly, pushed by light currents. This added a feeling of calm and harmony. All this was done so that Lenya could relax. But my thoughts did not allow me to do this. Her gaze was alarmed. Miss tried to understand whether there was a threat to her brother because she did not want to go to the Empire, and what, in connection with this, had to be done. Suddenly the thought came to mind to remember the past again, and the lady realized that she had forgotten one important detail. It is associated with the Battle of Midrian. This war broke out between the Empire and the Kingdom of Diolans in the border area of Adlan. This meant that, judging by the memories from a past life, a battle was about to break out in the Empire, and the Duke will have to go there to command the troops. He had previously been seriously wounded during this confrontation. Doctors tried to help him for a long time, but in the end this wound tormented him all his life, and it never disappeared. All these memories brought sadness and pain to the girl. She tried to think of a way to change this, but nothing came to mind. There was only one way to protect the guy and keep his brother safe. The only way out was to go to the Empire, even if you didn't want it. And at this time the Duke was telling his assistant about his plans to go to the kingdom again. After all, he wanted to enter into an engagement with Lenya there. The guy asked Valencia to prepare everything else herself. There was no need to report such things in his domain. Therefore, he could immediately go to the capital. The maid asked if this was the final decision. However, the second assistant who was in the room asked her to watch her words. But the woman insisted that the guy think it over again. The Duke again said that his decision was final, and hitting the table with his hand, he asked to end this conversation. After all, he believed that he should not ask Valencia's consent to his engagement. The woman realized that he was right. Therefore, she didn't answer him anymore. Clovis continued to say that subjects should not tell their master who to marry and who not to marry. However, she later added that simply announcing an engagement was very unlike the Duke, but she agreed that even those close to her should not have crossed boundaries. Therefore, I asked for forgiveness for allowing myself too much. The guy offered to end the conversation, but said that he would keep the assistant's opinion in mind. After all, I hoped that they would like the bride too. And he called the rumors about her madness groundless. Besides, Elton saw everything himself. Moreover, this marriage had no benefit for the guy. The Duke believed that the palace was probably looking for a way to remove him and deprive him of power. And if he marries the princess, then Pontiano will also be added to them. After all, he understood that then people from the kingdom would quietly dig under it. But he was ready to endure everything, and he believed that this would not break him. He also asked the servants if they had the same opinion about him. Valencia once again apologized to the Duke for her behavior. Elton wanted to agree with the guy, but suggest that he find someone more beautiful. But he said nothing. The assistant asked the brunette what this marriage meant to him, and he immediately smiled. The Duke said it was a treaty, but this is only the case for now. Meanwhile, Pepin reported to the princess that the crack in the dam on the Ponte River had been repaired on the girl's instructions. And thanks to this, the flood was avoided. The lady believed that it was possible that if she were close to Clovis, their lives could turn out differently. And at that moment I caught myself thinking that I wanted to be with him. And, be that as it may, a start was made. The girl left the bath and went to her room. Miss wanted to rest but saw a guest in the room. The lady wondered why he came to her in the middle of the night without warning. Her brother Rodrigo was sitting in the room. The blonde asked if he had done anything, and the guy replied that he was also glad to see his sister. But I noticed that she spoke as if she already knew everything. But the girl didn't even have anything to answer him. Rodrigo said that he came just to see her. After all, she was busy all day. The lady confirmed that she was busy and asked why everyone came to her room today. The guy said that his sister was probably glad that he came last. And after that he announced that he himself would go to the Empire. There was misunderstanding in Miss's eyes. She couldn't understand what he was talking about. But the brother continued and asked her to live in peace, doing all sorts of crazy things, and not to pay attention to the fact that they said that nothing would help her, and nothing would save her. He also suggested moving to the Summer Palace, or to the high priest Luke. Lenia asked what Rodrigo was talking about, and she asked me to explain all these words. The guy began to tell me that my sister shouldn't have to carry this whole burden on her shoulders alone. After all, he also returned on his own, just like her. These words were incomprehensible to the girl, so she asked not to joke like that, and she asked where he had returned. But the prince again repeated the phrase that he had also returned, like his sister. The girl seemed to begin to understand what was being said. Her face suddenly changed and began to express extreme surprise. The girl's eyes opened wide and her pupils dilated in shock. Miss opened her mouth slightly as if she was about to say something, but the words stuck in her throat. The guy continued, asking him not to forgive. After all, that day his sister should not have given him the book. And I shouldn't have left her in that state. The brother apologized for not being able to protect his sister. Lenia suddenly felt tears welling up in her eyes. Her face changed with new emotions. The eyes filled with tears sparkled, and thin streams began to slowly flow down her cheeks. She tried to hold on, but the lump in her throat grew larger and larger, and her lips began to tremble. Miss closed her eyes, and trying to hold back the sobs, but the tears continued to flow. Her shoulders shook. Her breathing became ragged and heavy. Lenia pressed her hands to her face, desperately trying to hide her grief. But tears flowed through her fingers, and quiet sobs escaped from her chest. The crying was full of pain and despair, but there was also some release in it, a long-awaited release from pent-up emotions. The girl realized that her brother was also returning to the past. The prince remembered his childhood. On that day of his return, he walked outside and slept on the green grass. Suddenly, the boy heard someone calling him. A small white-haired girl with big blue eyes approached him and called him brother. She looked at him with naive eyes. The first thing the boy thought was that he was in heaven. The little girl said that he promised in secret from his brother Ludwig to ride her on a horse today. However, he still continued to sleep. The little princess put her hand on her brother's knee and he felt her touch. The boy realized that he was alive again, and his sister is also alive. Rodrigo Alizdebi returned to his 13 years. It was strange to him how this was possible, and he immediately thought that perhaps his mother was also alive. He had a ring on his hand. The girl turned to her brother, asking what glittered on his finger. Extending her open palm to him, the beauty asked him to give this item to her, but he said that he could not give it to his sister. Lenia began to ask why and asked to give it to her anyway. But Rodrigo explained that the item was not his. His mother gave him this ring. The princess immediately realized that this object belonged to Mrs. Jenna, and she said that this decoration is very beautiful. The girl asked who gave it to the boy's mother, and she suggested that it could be his father. But he explained that it was another person who took care of the woman. Lenia said that since that man gave such a beautiful thing, it means he really liked Mrs. And Rodrigo's mother called her very beautiful. The brother decided to cheer up his sister, saying that she would also become very beautiful. The girl was very pleased to hear this, and she asked why the mother left the boy something for girls, even though he was a boy. And I thought that he would give it to someone dear when he had such a person. Rodrigo agreed with his sister. After that, he began to stroke her soft hair. During this cheerful conversation, the sound of footsteps was heard. It was Ludwig who came up. He began to insult his brother and asked him not to touch his sister. And later he grabbed the girl by the hand and began to pull her. Lenia began to cry because it hurt her from such touches. But he asked to be quiet so as not to anger him. And after that, turning to his brother, he insulted him again and asked why he didn't say hello. After all, His Highness and his sister stood in front of him. Ludwig asked what kind of knight he would make. The girl asked her brother in surprise why he called Rodrigo a knight. And the prince explained that his father had sent his brother to Wiefel to become a knight. The blonde believed that he simply did not know his place. The little princess looked at her brother with frightened eyes and asked if it was true that he was leaving. But Ludwig stopped her, telling her not to talk to Rodrigo anymore. He also said that they would not see him again. After that, he again began to pull his sister's hand, taking her further and further away from her brother. Later, Rodrigo left for the capital, and when he returned, he was already 18 years old. In the capital, he was busy, participating in endless battles and carrying out the orders of the king. And he remained alive. Therefore, at some point he began to be called the hero of Pontiano, and the knight leading to victories. Lenia asked her brother if he saw how the history of the kingdom unfolded further, and what it turned into later. After all, it was strange why Rodrigo still wanted to take this hard path again. The girl believed that it was very difficult for him last time. Therefore, I asked him to tell me honestly what he wanted now. Surely the reason for his desire to go to the Empire and become a hostage was that he was worried about her. But perhaps there was something more. Rodrigo realized that his sister was right and understood that reason. He also agreed that it was really difficult for him before. After all, his peers were singing wine and having fun with girls. He wandered through the battlefields waving his sword. It was like hell, and she was completely different, not the same as before. But the guy didn't regret anything now. After all, he had something worth protecting, Kingdom and his sister. Therefore, he asked the girl to stay here, and he himself planned to change history. He asked Lenya to live a happy life and not think about either the kingdom or the duke. But the girl still could not allow her brother to go there. She believed that he did not personally see how people like him were treated there. Rodrigo asked if it would be okay if his sister went there. Moreover, he should not have become a hostage and endure bad treatment. He was to become king of Pontiano. This surprised Miss very much, because she believed that Ludwig would certainly become king. That's why she avoided marrying the duke, so that he would not use the marriage for his own purposes. She was surprised that her brother was going to change everything in history, and she told him that they couldn't change the past that much. Rodrigo asked why his sister thought so. After all, they returned from the past and this already changed things. He also noticed that the princess was also trying to change something. For example, she pretended to be insane to avoid marriage to the duke, and she also wanted to prevent him from leaving for the empire. This was all probably done in order to change the past. When their conversation ended, the lady sat in her room thinking about what she had heard. Miss couldn't believe that Rodrigo would become king, and that it is he who will eventually go to the empire. After all, if his brother leaves the kingdom, he will be able to get out from under the gaze of Rohana and Ludwig. However, it was not clear how exactly he was going to change everything and what he wanted to do there. The girl wondered if her brother had a specific plan, and I considered such thoughts a natural reaction. After all, she herself did everything to be mistaken for a madwoman. The lady understood that her brother had personally seen how Ludwig made life in the kingdom hell. Lenya could not understand what was in the guy's thoughts. Suddenly, the bag that Rodrigo left her caught her eye. This made her remember the gift. That evening, her brother gave her this bag and asked her to keep it. Out of curiosity, the girl decided to see what was there. After all, I thought that this could have been left for him to keep. From there, the lady took out something that looked like a woman's ring. It was exactly the same thing that she had asked her brother for as a child. But it was not clear why he gave it to her right now. And then she put the ring back in the bag. Miss went to the window and began to look at what was happening from inside. After returning, she first saw the Duke in this window. It seemed unclear where the guy she used to know had gone. The girl was worried that he, like her brother and her, could return to this world. This thought made me scared. But it was also possible that he had simply not shown his true colors to her before. There was a quiet knock at the door. It was Pepin. Lenya allowed her to enter and found out what happened. The maid began to try to explain that the king was currently heading to the Pink Palace. The man walked with a very important look. After all, he had an urgent conversation with his daughter. When he came to his daughter, the princess bowed to him. She also asked what he wanted to tell her. His Majesty began to explain that news had come from the Empire from the Duke. Miss was a little surprised by this. After all, the guy was hoping for a speedy engagement. However, the Empire wanted to cancel all talk about the wedding, not to mention the engagement. Lenya didn't understand how to explain this situation to herself, so she asked her father again. This seemed impossible. The king explained that he did not take the rumors to heart. However, given the princess's madness, he too was apparently beginning to go crazy, and also explained that the Duke was going to accept the position of the Emperor, maintaining the engagement until Lenya's mental illness was removed. And this despite the fact that the Empire no longer wanted it. The guy wanted to send a letter about this as soon as possible, and to do this despite holding Rodrigo hostage. Hearing this, the lady became furious. She clenched her hand tightly into a fist, and turning to her father, she said that her brother was a knight who defeated Tia, so it would be very stupid to just hold him hostage. Her father explained to her that if she had behaved correctly from the very beginning, this would not have happened. After all, Lenya herself spread rumors throughout the Empire, without even knowing that then the Duke stood on the same side as the Emperor, and soon he backed down and got engaged. But now the empire will no longer be their account. Therefore, it was announced that he would not be able to get engaged. The father, worried, shouted at his daughter. He said over and over again that everything would have been fine if she had behaved so correctly from the very beginning. And if Miss didn't exist at all, then everything would be fine. The king also accused the princess of killing Rodrigo. After all, otherwise this boy could have died for the country. But she ruined everything. The distressed blonde asked her father what he wanted from her. The man silently looked into her eyes, and he ordered her to go to the empire with Rodrigo. However, Lenya replied that if her father wanted to send her to the empire as a hostage, then her brother was not obliged to go with her. The king objected to these words. After all, the girl had to go to the empire not as a hostage but as a bride. He also stated that, according to the high priest Luke, the one who could heal the girl was now in the capital. At that moment, Lenya realized what a problem this man was hiding within himself. After all, in this way her plan could be destroyed. The king reported that he intended to fulfill only half of the empire's demands, and he stated that when his daughter gets better, he will ask the emperor for a wedding. But even for this, you will have to send Rodrigo away. Therefore, if she wanted the best for him, she had to go to the empire for treatment. After all, the brother could return when the lady is cured and marries the duke. Lenya asked her father if he had ever thought that Rodrigo was much more suitable for the role of king than Ludwig. However, he began to declare that it was pointless, since strong rulers must have a pure pedigree. The lady wondered why all this was needed. After all, my father's attitude towards this issue was very strange. The girl stated that her parent was much worse than she had previously thought about him. It turned out that their family, due to the so-called pure pedigree, was forced to accept a greedy and incompetent son. But the king stopped his daughter and asked her to shut up. He believed that there was no turning back for the kingdom. However, Miss stated that if Ludwig becomes king, the kingdom will simply close, and it will disappear from the world map. And the reasons for this will be the pure pedigree, in which the father continued to believe. These words angered the man, and he even started shouting at his daughter. The girl asked to speak more quietly, repeating that she was not deaf. She was also ready to say something else. If her father believed that she had nothing to do with this, then she simply had no choice. After all, even the duke was the son of a dancer. Therefore, the princess believed that pedigree had no influence on a person's status. Clovis, meanwhile, trained his assistants in sword fighting. He was very skilled in this matter. The blows of swords were heard one after another on the field. The duke noted that Romanson was open on the left. The guy showed the servants weak points during the fight, and he asked him to be more careful next time. During this training, Elton unexpectedly came, but the servant believed that he should have been doing work at that time. However, for some reason, I didn't do this. The assistant replied that they came to the ring every day, so it was a little noisy there. But the duke tried to calm them down, and he said that when they saw each other, they quarreled every time. He also asked them to stop talking. The brunette noted, looking at the sky, that it was apparently going to rain soon, but Elton interrupted him, saying that there was no one in Mally's family who looked like a bandit. He was sorry that his mother had to entrust her youngest son to look after the eldest. However, this woman had previously said that they had enough help. This man considered himself smarter than Romanson, so he believed that he should have become the leader. The duke suggested we go inside before it started to rain, and immediately after that, he heard how he was asked not to change the topic. A little later, Valencia ran up to him, and she said that Diarance had already moved forward. These words caused some outrage. After all, for him it was a complete surprise. Therefore, the brunette asked to contact the locals. He didn't want the royal family to know what happened. The assistant said that she had already contacted Baron Opal, and he said that he had sent a letter to the kingdom. The woman handed another letter into the hands of the duke, and he began to read it. It was a royal order for the princess to break off their engagement. They also requested that the glutton be sent as soon as possible. The sky was already covered with dense, low-hanging clouds. They seemed almost black from their density and heaviness and moved slowly, as if they were closing above the head. Lightning cut through the darkness with terrifying brightness. They also illuminated everything around for a split second. Each flash was accompanied by thunderclaps that echoed in the distance. They shake the air and the earth. The clouds thundered and the rain poured incessantly, intensifying every minute. Water quickly flowed from the roofs and knocked on the windows. This created the impression that nature had staged a real end of the world. and it was full of wild, indomitable power. The lady sat in her room and wondered if she had been told before that they would consider calling off the engagement. After all, since everything has already been decided, she would probably just be told to obey, and that's it. During all these thoughts, the girl did not even notice how Pepin entered the room. She looked at the lady with pity, but the princess didn't want to talk to anyone now. She was just trying to figure out what to do next. The lady sat, lost in thought, and the maid came closer and closer to her. A little later, the assistant informed the princess that it was raining very heavily, and it seemed that it would not stop soon. The blonde agreed with this. In the kingdom, it rained non-stop for 3 days and 3 nights, and it was reminiscent of that terrible downpour that caused the flood before her return. Lenya understood that if it continued, something terrible could happen. After all, it is quite likely that the dam that she ordered to be repaired could have cracked, or another one could be in danger. Miss asked the assistant if she had told her to look after the small dams, and the maid reported that her father checked them and said that there was nothing unusual. Therefore, I asked the hostess not to worry. However, the girl understood that something was still wrong. After all, she didn't remember it raining so heavily before she returned. The girl's sad look was filled with deep melancholy and sadness. Her eyes, usually lively and shining, seemed dull and lifeless. Her gaze was directed into the distance, as if she was trying to find solace in the emptiness in front of her. Tears glistened in the corners of her eyes, ready to roll down her cheeks at any moment. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly, creating a shadow on her forehead, and the lips trembled barely noticeably, betraying hidden pain. There were so many unexpressed words and emotions in that look that my heart involuntarily sank with sympathy. Suddenly, the sound of someone's footsteps was heard in the room. It was Rodrigo. Entering the girl's room, he immediately noted that there was a very heavy rainfall. The lady turned her gaze to her brother, and he said that he had returned. The guy was also surprised that Pepin was also in this room. The prince greeted everyone present. The girl asked why he came so suddenly. After all, the guy didn't even warn in advance about his arrival. Miss also noted that he still had not learned to knock before entering, but Rodrigo replied that they had not seen Pepin for a long time, and also wanted to ask his sister something. The conversation was not planned to be long. Therefore, the prince suggested that he be held in the room of mirrors, and the girl agreed to this. However, she asked her brother to speak to the point. She told the maid that she would return soon. The assistant promised to wait for her. The guy and the girl headed to the appointed place. After this, Rodrigo began to choose words for the conversation. This was a very important question, and he touched the lives of many people. The prince wanted to know whether Lenya had considered the problem of a dam on the Ponte River. After all, there has never been such a heavy downpour recently. The girl admitted that it was also very rainy a few months ago, so she ordered the dam to be repaired, but she didn't do anything else. Rodrigo realized that he had to tell his sister a very important thing earlier. The lady felt uneasy about this. After all, she saw deep sadness in her brother's eyes. The guy admitted that they cannot prevent natural disasters like earthquakes. Therefore, it was precisely because of this that what should have happened several months ago was apparently happening now. Nature cannot be changed so easily. Therefore, they could not have avoided the catastrophe. Not now, not in the future. After all, if they want to change something, then everything depended only on time. A very heavy downpour came only to close the whole of events that had not happened before. In the end, everything had to go its own way. However, the guy was afraid that something more could happen. The girl was very frightened by all this and began to ask what she should do now. She really wanted to save other people's lives. The lady couldn't just sit and do nothing. After all, I knew how it would all end. But it was obvious that all these people could have died due to a natural disaster. Miss couldn't accept the fact that it wasn't worth paying attention to. The guy assured his sister that even if she knew the cause of her own death, she could not change the life and death of another person. However, she did not agree with this. After all, she believed that they should save people who deserved to be saved. Having said this, Miss fell to the floor. Her brother caught her and asked her not to worry so much about all these events. After all, at this rate, she could lose knowledge. The girl realized that this also applied to Miss Jenny. She was Rodrigo's mother. He said that because of their attempts to delay her death of their own free will, the mother died more painfully. It was impossible to even look at her body without pity, and some believed that it was not even her body. However, this rumor even penetrated the royal family. After talking with her brother, the lady could not come to her senses for a long time, as she was worried about all these events. She asked Pepin to assume that the person she loved was dead, but she could save his life. But if I saved him now, then this man could die more painfully. The lady asked whether the maid would have saved her beloved in such a case or not, and she replied that if this had happened to her, she would have told all this to the person. She would tell him how much she loves and appreciates him before his death. However, the assistant was not in such circumstances. The maid also said that when the time came for this person to die, her body would react before her mind. However, it was a little selfish. The girl went to the window and again began to look at the rain. It looked like she was about to leave somewhere, so the assistant asked her not to talk about it during such a heavy downpour, and yet she invited her to go to the empire. After all, the kingdom was located on a wet, dirty island. This idea seemed quite reasonable to the lady. Now the blonde knew what to do. Turning to the maid, the princess said that she wanted to ask her for something. The lady wanted to get out of the royal palace as quickly as possible, but do it so that no one knows about it. Therefore, she asked Pepin to help her with this. At that moment, it didn't matter whose clothes she was wearing. She simply asked the maid to find any set. After all, it was necessary to leave the palace as quickly as possible and only at night. Lenya wanted to meet the duke without letting anyone know about it. The carriage wheels rotated slowly on the wet asphalt during the rain. Water splashed from them, leaving wet marks. The sound of the wheels was muffled and dull, creating a special atmosphere of privacy and tranquility. In this carriage sat Lenya with her assistant. She asked Her Highness whether she slammed the door too sharply, but the girl replied that everything was fine. After all, she had already paid the coachman. Still, she was pleased that they got out through the east gate without too much trouble. And Pepin, sitting next to her, looked at her mistress, wondering what could bother her so much. It had been raining non-stop for days, and it didn't end. The huge puddles couldn't even dry up because the sun didn't appear. The lady recalled how in the summer, when the dam on the Fund River broke, the water overflowed its banks. Then a deadly plague raged all around. And if Rodrigo was right, then flooding was not a serious problem. Closing her eyes, Lenya thought. Now she was beginning to understand that the dam would collapse due to irresponsibility. And that was human error. However, an epidemic was to follow. Miss was interested to know whether natural disasters really cannot be influenced. All these thoughts haunted her. That's why the assistant noticed that she didn't look well. The lady recalled her brother's request to stay in the kingdom. And don't try to change the Grand Duke's life. This was something that shouldn't be interfered with. But the girl could not quite come to terms with this. Such thoughts haunted her. And our hearts sank, worrying about our beloved. Under the weight of these reflections, Miss bowed down and laid her head on her lap. She really wanted and even considered herself obligated to save the guy. Trying to find a way out, the girl wanted to think about her brother's words again. To find the line between what she could change and what she couldn't. What cannot be changed is the rain that flooded the entire kingdom, and also the subsequent plague, which will claim many lives. The girl thought that if she could save these people, then how could she help the Duke in this case? Therefore, I tried to find a solution on how to do this. After all, if she saves someone, then the person may die an even more painful death. And she tried to understand whether she had made the wrong decision. There was little hope of saving the guy. But still, Miss decided to do as much as possible now, so as not to regret anything later. The carriage continued its journey along the wet road. Its spruce wheels moved forward due to the water accumulated on the ground. Meanwhile, one of the maids began to look for Helen. The other one told her that she had gone somewhere. Although I was here just a minute ago. The assistants assumed that something urgent had happened. After all, this maid even left all the cleaning equipment right in the corridor. Apparently, she really had urgent matters to attend to. But in that case, she should have at least warned the others before leaving. The interlocutor suggested that she finish cleaning and go downstairs. The maids believed that the princess was very tired today, so she went to her room so early. They wanted to enjoy this time while they could. In addition, today there was a satisfying and attractive dinner. The head chef prepared a pie with plum compote. Others said it was incredibly delicious, so we wanted to try it after work. The maids decided to do so, agreeing to go there together. The girls took their work equipment with them so as not to leave it in the corridor. And after that, the dark rooms of the castle began to go down. The rain still didn't stop falling. For many days, the inhabitants of the kingdom have not seen the sun. The Duke, meanwhile, was in his office with his assistant. While pondering one question, he tossed a peach up and then caught it. Valencia came in to see him. Turning to the guy, she said that Princess Lenya had arrived to meet him. This was very unexpected for the brunette. He did not know how to react to this meeting and what the girl wanted to talk to him about. His eyes opened wide in surprise. Valencia repeated that the princess was now in front of the main gate dressed as a maid. This behavior was very unusual for a girl, and the protracted heavy rain still did not subside. The falling water created a rhythmic beat. Streams flowed through the streets, washing away traces on the sidewalks. Clouds of dark tones hung low over the city, blocking the light of the sun. In such conditions, the girl stood near the carriage and waited for the guy. He asked if she had come here alone. Besides, why do it in such rain? He considered this a rash act on her part. The assistant wanted to ask if the guy wanted to see her. Before she could finish speaking, she saw that he was already running to meet her. Words were superfluous here. The brunette's behavior surprised his assistants a little. After all, the guy had never behaved like this before. He didn't have much to do with girls. The Duke continued to run with all his might towards the princess. It was clear that he really wanted to see her as soon as possible. Running through the corridors of his castle, he made the sound of loud footsteps. The girl was already in the corridor with her assistant. She took off her hood and rain-soaked cape. Her blonde hair was only slightly wet during this storm. Seeing the lady, the guy stopped. He still had to go down the stairs to her, but she herself began to take steps towards him. And he just stood and looked at her, enjoying the beauty of Lenya. Her arrival was very unexpected. The guy didn't know whether to be happy about this or not, but still he really wanted to know the reason why the guest decided to visit him. And since this was done under such circumstances, the reason was very important. The princess said that she wanted to ask the Duke something. But first I asked if he would have a free minute. The guy, having met the girl, led her through dark corridors until they ended up in his office. It was decorated in warm colors with dark wooden shelves on which stood books and figurines. Maps and travel pictures hung on the walls, and from the windows one could see gray clouds and raindrops on the glass. He politely invited Miss to sit down and offered her a cup of hot tea, all to keep the blonde warm after the trip. His attention and care made the blonde fall more and more in love with him. The Duke said that he was very curious about what she wanted to ask him. After all, the lady had traveled a long way in a carriage in the pouring rain. Plus, she had a very awkward outfit, and the reason was unlikely to be a sudden longing for him. The blonde agreed with this, but before starting to answer the question asked, she silently looked into the guy's eyes. A little later, she reported that during the last conversation he offered her freedom, but she was here to make sure that he still wanted to keep his promise. After all, if this is so, then Miss agreed to go to the Empire. From surprise, the Duke at first could not utter a word, and I couldn't understand whether Lenya realized the meaning of what she just said. However, the lady began to say that she was perfectly aware of her words. She was ready to go to the Empire with the Duke as a bride and marry him. The conversation on this rainy day was intense. He foreshadowed changes for both the guy and the girl regarding their future. The brunette decided to find out the reason for the princess's behavior. And sitting opposite her on an antique blue sofa, he asked this question. He asked about the reason why the girl decided to marry him. This was quite unexpected, because before she had no desire to do this. But Lenya said that she really needed this marriage. As she spoke, the blonde tilted her head, trying not to look the guy in the eyes, but he asked why she needed it. Miss replied that she needed a shield that would guarantee her freedom in the future. Although it was a sudden decision, it was still a deliberate one. She also reminded the guy that in the current situation, whether she wants it or not, in the end she will still have to go to the Empire. And since she could not avoid this, she chose marriage with him. After all, she considered the brunette a reliable account, and those behind whom you can hide and get some benefit. But the Duke believed that something was clearly wrong here. The girl behaved too confidently, as if for a person who asked for protection. Therefore, the guy asked to explain the whole situation to him again. After that, the blonde replied that she simply saw no reason to be insecure, and she also promised to be a shield for her lover too. The lady tried to explain that this relationship will not be one-sided, where only the guy will protect her. She wanted them to serve as shields for each other. Hearing this, the Duke smiled slightly. He was glad that the girl did not behave selfishly, but was ready to give something to him. However, this behavior was quite predictable. Therefore, Clovis promised to consider the proposal that he had now received and later give an answer. These words scared the blonde. The girl could not understand what exactly the guy wanted to think about. And what did he have in mind in this case? The lady believed that in this case, he initially did not want to take her to the empire. However, the Duke said that it seemed that the advantage was now on his side. These words began to anger the princess. She felt very uncomfortable during this conversation, but the guy reminded that the decision was now his. Regardless of whether they got engaged or married, he wanted the girl in his arms. After that, he asked again if Miss had understood correctly, and after that he said that he would take Lenya with him to the empire if she was ready to accept his conditions. After all, only under such circumstances was he ready to do her a favor. The girl asked what this meant and what the guy's conditions were. After all, she believed that she could still refuse after listening to Clovis. The first condition was that the betrothal ceremony would have to take place in accordance with his requirements, and there should be no omissions or oversights. The Duke was ready to take care of the most magnificent engagement banquet himself. The girl wondered why he needed all this. After all, this required a lot of effort and expense. She also did not want this event to become publicly known. The second condition was that they would have to get married within a year of their engagement. This way they will have 4 seasons to get to know each other better. Throughout their engagement, the lady must remain in the Duchess's chambers, and this should be the case wherever they are, on an estate or in the capital. And after the wedding, the guy planned to live with his wife in the same chambers, and she would have to accompany him wherever he went. Lenya felt trapped, and she couldn't understand what it all meant. The idea arose that the guy was constantly thinking about these 2 conditions. However, in the end she said that these 2 conditions did not impose obligations on her at all, although the second condition differed from the first in importance. The lady asked if these demands were just the guy's fun, but he replied that he took it quite seriously. After all, he really wanted the blonde the way she was, and he wanted her to know about it. However, he needed the girl not only because she was a princess. The Duke confessed to Lenya that he loved her very much. This was unusual for her to hear. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. After that, the brunette asked for the lady's hand, and he promised to become for her not only a shield, but also a sword. Therefore, he asked to stop addressing him with a meaningless title, and he asked to be called simply by his first name, Clovis. Approaching even closer to the lady, the Duke tenderly kissed her hand, and he asked if she agreed to these conditions. On that rainy day, the girl didn't have much of a choice. Miss understood that the family would insist on her wedding in any case. Besides, this way it was possible to save my brother. After that, the guy left the office and headed towards Valencia. He asked her to prepare for the celebration at the estate. The assistant asked if he planned to hit the road right now, and the Duke replied that this was what his bride wanted. This was unexpected for the woman. She believed that Miss would prefer to go to the capital's mansion. After all, she liked more elegant things and places. Valencia asked again when he was about to leave for the capital, and the guy replied that he planned to delay the trip as long as possible. But since the princess was now his bride, there should be no problems with staying outside the capital. However, the woman was frightened by possible rumors that were spreading among the nobility. Although the guy himself had never cared about such trifles before. But this was the problem that the assistant wanted to tell him about. The Duke had too many enemies. Therefore, she hoped that the place of the Duchess would be taken by the girl who could alleviate some of these problems. But Clovis was not ready to discuss this topic again. Valencia believed that the lady would not be able to portray a society lady convincingly enough. The brunette repeated once again that he wanted to see only Lenya next to him. This is to be expected. And then the assistant decided to ask the gentleman a question again. She wanted to know why he liked this girl so much, but the answer was obvious. The blonde needed a shield. Moreover, she was the most beautiful girl in the kingdom. This conversation seemed frivolous to the woman. The assistant also decided to clarify the engagement ceremony. The guy wanted it to take place on the estate, and he asked to organize the most luxurious and magnificent holiday. Valencia reflected that the Duke had previously been unable to tolerate empty formalities and fuss. But this event is just an engagement ceremony. It's not even a wedding. It was unclear why the guy wanted it to be luxurious and magnificent. And a little later I heard that he suggested discussing this with the kingdom. And if they intended to arrange everything their own way, this woman had to agree. After all, the main thing for the brunette was to focus on the princess and show her sophistication. The assistant had already heard that the girl was a beautiful flower of royal banquets before her madness. However, His Excellency never liked lavish banquets, and he even thought it was a waste of money. Valencia understood that if this engagement took place on such a scale only because of the wishes of the princess, then it would not be easy for them in the future. Next, she asked about the dowry. But the guy was surprised because he considered it unnecessary for the engagement. However, the assistant stated that it was mandatory if a wedding was planned. After all, part of the dowry was requested from the engagement. The Duke asked if there had been any news from the kingdom of Pontiano. The woman agreed, but the dowry list that was attached to the engagement letter was simply insane. And in this way, the small kingdom hoped to snatch a large share from the Grand Duke. The guy whispered to himself, repeating that the kingdom expected to get a good share of the dowry. In the eyes of Valencia, this crossed all boundaries. But the woman believed that she had to deal with all this herself. The brunette decided to ask again what the most expensive thing on the list was, and he assumed that it was probably the Rhodelia ship. The assistant thought it strange to ask if he already knew everything, and she confirmed the guy's guess. Unexpectedly, he offered to give it to them. But this action seemed illogical. After all, by giving them this ship, the Empire will open part of its unique sea route. The Duke understood this, and he knew what Valencia was worried about. But he said that this ship was not as valuable to him as his beloved princess. The following events took place in the Pink Palace. There the rain, which was getting heavier every day, still did not stop. It was clear that the elements were excessively raging. Meanwhile, Lenya's favorite maid was looking for her. And when she found it, the blonde asked Pepin what happened. After all, judging by the maid's reaction, something bad really happened. The frightened assistant ran up to the lady and told Her Highness that something terrible had happened to Helen. She was dead. The girl couldn't believe her ears. In a past life, she was a maid whom Rohana ordered to hand over the chocolate that poisoned her husband. Now it turned out that the one who had been an accomplice in the destruction of the princess's life was dead, and it was quite strange. More and more questions arose. The maid began to tell Her Highness about this and asked forgiveness for her carelessness. And she began to say that De Niro, the captain of the royal guard, could soon come for her. But the lady could not understand what kind of carelessness she was talking about, and why she had to be arrested. A moment later, there was a loud knock on the door of the room where the girls were. And a little later it opened and many soldiers came in with the captain. After this, it was ordered to capture Pepin. The maid hugged her mistress and she asked the man how to understand all this. He explained that Pepin Diafon should be detained in connection with the murder of Helen de Trun. The princess asked to provide her with evidence of her assistant's guilt. The man promised to find evidence as soon as the investigation began. But the lady repeated that she asked to be given valid reasons for detaining the maid. He said that they have a witness. However, now he could not say who it was. It was strange for the princess to have a witness who could not be spoken of. This seemed heresy to her. De Niro said that this situation is very serious. Therefore, he hoped for Her Highness's understanding. But the lady said that since this is a serious problem, it means they must strictly follow the law. Therefore, she first asked to take the soldiers out of the room, and then provide her with evidence or witnesses. After all, one of the maids in her palace died, and an assistant close to her was involved in the case. The blonde wanted to be the first to get all the information. After these words, the man asked the guards to wait outside. The warriors left the room. De Niro remembered that people were saying that the princess had gone mad, but she was not so easy to deal with. A little later, another maid came into Lenya's room. She greeted Her Highness. She also said her name, Zephyr. The lady remembered that it was Rohana's head maid. The question arose as to what brought her here without an invitation, but it was clear that the queen was connected with this incident. The assistant apologized to the girl, and she said that it was rude of her. She noticed that the door to the princess's room was open, so she decided to enter. And she came for the same reason as De Niro. And then she asked the lady what she would do if they found evidence of Pepin's involvement in Helen's death. The miss asked what evidence they were talking about, and was there any evidence pointing to the assistant as the culprit? The maid boldly stated that she had such evidence. After this, Lenya had a bad feeling, but she still asked her to provide evidence about the assistant's involvement in this. After all, if she is convinced, she can hand Pepin over to the guards. But until this moment, no one had the right to do this. Zephyr began to say something indistinctly, so the lady asked if she had heard her, and she asked me to bring her material evidence again. and also witnesses who could confirm that Pepin is indeed a suspect. The girl extended her hand to the maid and asked to provide all this, but the answer was silence. It continued to rain outside the window. The drops persistently knocked on the glass. Pepin looked out the window, but her thoughts were deep inside. The maid was absorbed in her own doubts and worries. When almost everyone left, there was silence in the room, interrupted only by the sound of rain and the heavy breathing of the maid. The girl was sitting in the mistress's room, hugging her knees tightly. Tears streamed down her cheeks, creating bright, salty marks on her cheeks. Her eyes reflected the agonizing fear of unfair accusations, and this thought only increased her anxiety. Lenya asked if she was okay. She also assured that she believed in the assistant's innocence. The princess wiped tears from the maid's eyes, trying to provide her with support, and she said that no matter what evidence or witnesses they had, none of this would prove her involvement. Even if they publish the whole story, it will definitely reveal the truth. Miss had no doubt that there would be some serious inconsistency in their version. After all, it will be a lie, and it will be possible to recognize it. The princess persistently asked her dear assistant not to worry. She also assured her of her protection, but at the same time, she was sorry that the maid had to deal with this. A little later, the queen was told what had happened and why Pippin could not be arrested. This angered the woman. She started screaming and asking who ordered this to happen. In response, she heard that it was Prince Ludwig. It was also decided to find out what happened to the evidence and witnesses. Everything should have been ready by now. The maid assured the queen that everything was going well. The prince has already invented false evidence, saying that Pippin left Helen's chambers. This news did not please the queen. She clearly told her son not to do anything, and she asked not to interfere in this matter. She considered the prince's behavior to be impudence. After all, Ludwig did not listen to her. The maid decided to find out how the king viewed this situation, and the lady replied that His Majesty is aware of this situation, but at the moment, he pretends that he didn't know anything. After this, the queen turned to the maid again, calling her closer to her, and she said that since everything had turned out this way, they needed to act as quickly as possible. Therefore, she wanted the news to be delivered to her by tomorrow, that Pepin Diaphon had been sent to jail.